好的，那我们平行。
So let's start our parallel session 2, distinguished leaders and guests. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to the 2021 Asia Pacific Forum on Green and Low Carbon Development and join us for the parallel session 2, actions for carbon peaking and synergy of pollution reduction and carbon reduction. So I would brief myself. I'm Lin Wenwei. I work for Energy Foundation China. It's honor for the foundation and the Sustainable Development Center to co-sponsor this event. It's a great pleasure for me to meet all of you online. For the past few years, we had hosted 4 of such forums, and I attended all of this in person. I love Changsha and I love the food in Changsha, but because of COVID-19, I cannot go there this time. And the Winter Olympics coming in Beijing, so we have very strict rules for COVID protocols. So I can only see you online. We would like to thank the sponsors and all of you, as well as experts online, for overcome so many challenges to meet online. So we hope that this session, combining online and offline methods, will be even more fruitful in outcomes. So according to our agenda, I will first begin with a few remarks. On behalf of the sponsor and the Energy Foundation of China, I would say a few words about my own understanding about the carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. So it's just like a warming up. Many of the colleagues and experts may not know our foundation. It's actually a non-profit organization. It's been operating in China for more than 2 decades. We provide support for China for transition to low carbon and sustainable development and promote green economic development. Our foundation in past few years have sponsored some pilot cities, including carbon peaking, synergy between carbon and pollution reduction, as well as carbon neutrality. Our pilots also include some of the key cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Qingdao, Chengdu, Jinan in carbon peaking and synergy of reduction. So I would like to share with you my ideas and understanding of the theme of this forum. For the macro perspective, we have now the dual carbon targets. We feel that there are major changes taking place. Carbon neutrality and carbon peaking 1+N policy net framework is being made, and we have seen many are retweeting about their top design. But we need to also test whether it's accurate or applicable or not. We now have very good micro landscape. And for the response from different locations, the local governments are also preparing actively for this. And we searched online that in the bidding portals, we can see 50 or 60 cities are already engaged in carbon neutrality and carbon peaking bidding. And the government procurement range from several million to several hundreds of thousands yuan. So the local governments are also very active in this. So this is the top design, but to the different provincial and urban governments, municipal governments, businesses including Sinopec, Tencent, Ali are also making carbon neutrality plans. And Sinopec, as well as the Petrochemical of China, are also making relevant plans. So is now expanding its impact. In the past, maybe many of the businesses did not respond very well to those policies or carbon neutrality, but with the dual carbon rules, they are more active in this. And from my own perspective, in responding to target to implementation, we still see a gap. For example, we mentioned that the local governments are making relevant research and top-level design for carbon peaking, but I believe 2021 is a year for making goals. And for the next year, we will be implementing the plans. And from making targets and to implementing, I believe there is a gap, because in implementation, I believe in research, technology, decision making, we need to further enhance our capacity. And in terms of the carbon framework making, including data collection, MRV, system building, will also need to be completed. And for the reduction of pollution and carbon emission, we lack innovative plans and technologies. The previous or existing technologies will not be able to meet our demands in the new landscape, and so low carbon sectors need time to grow. And for the synergy, we need to have finance guarantee. So in our implementation, there is a still gap. And in our work, I also want to say that we can work on several fronts, including capacity building enhancement. In capacity, we still need to further strengthen capacity. And in terms of the foundation, we are working in this front as well. We study the best practices of the cities, as well as their success stories in implementation. And then we will have a case study, and we can see how to we can learn from each other in low carbon city building. And for target targets, from making targets to implementation in line with our theme, this synergy is an important method for low carbon development. For environmental system, it involves several aspects, including data collection, assessment, verification, accounting, etc. It needs a very complete system. So in carbon reduction, how can we learn from the environment system in this aspect? And to better implement our targets, we can think about this from top-level design, how to coordinate reduction of both pollutants and emission, especially the point source from the businesses. How can we better coordinate to lessen the burden on enterprises? And for the next step, we will need to involve the entire society. Carbon is now a central topic. With wider involvement of the public, we can better promote and apply more technologies. We have the policies and the mechanism for guidance, but without a market mechanism is not sustainable. Then how to innovate the finance system and cultivate relevant businesses and sectors. These are all our focus in next step. So these are some of my understanding, and that is why we are hosting this event. For me, I hope that this afternoon can be a moment of learning. And I have to apologize that I cannot attend the meeting in person. But my heart is always together with you, and I would like to wish this meeting a complete success. Thank you. And according to our agenda, the floor is given to Mr. Pan Tao, China Program Director, Institute for Sustainable Communities. Let's welcome. Thank you, Ms. Lin, for your introduction. I'm Pan Tao. I'm from ISC, the Institute for Sustainable Communities. The institute is an international one dedicated to sustainable development. It's an honor for me to be a co-sponsor of this session. We are very familiar with Hunan, actually. In the past 5 years, we are working with the Low Carbon Center, Mr. Zhang Fan, Mr. Xu Rong. We are conducting a study on the carbon peaking of Changsha, Zhuzhou, Xiangtan city cluster. So now I know Hunan very well. In this process, I believe we are taking the lead in China. We have a very solid foundation. And I'm encouraged to see that we can have such forum to share our experience in this. For this parallel session, the keywords include carbon peaking actions. We are making plans just now, but how to make a good plan is the key. We will have experts talking about transport and other aspects for carbon peaking. And secondly, synergy. Ms. Lin also mentioned that environmental management system is quite complete and comprehensive. And for the dual carbon goals, it's relatively young. We are still establishing the top-level framework. Then how can we better use our energy or efforts to achieve maximum results? This is our aim. So I believe the brainstorm in this afternoon will be very helpful. I love chatting myself. And the events recently do not say that we are having a very broad perspective and we can be blind in making efforts. All things or all processes will have up and downs. For example, the power shortage and the prices rising in energy will have an impact on both the businesses as well as people's lives. So I believe in our sharing, we should focus more on questions. Carbon reduction is not just an objective or code reduction of carbon emission. It's not just about quantity. It's closely related to the life of everybody and their production of businesses. So I believe the remarks and discussion today, especially in terms of synergy, we need to have a brainstorm. In the past 5 years, we have done a lot of research on peaking, and the local governments also rolled out their plans for carbon peaking. So what should we do next year? Especially as the think tank, like us, what can we do to help the local governments? So this is something that we want to discuss with you. So I want to leave more time to the audience as well as the experts online and offline. Through brainstorming, sharing of knowledge, we will come up with different and new ideas. Instead of just briefing on cases of a city, we hope this session can be more inspiring about the steps in next year. I believe this is more valuable. So, handing back to Ms. Lin. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pan. So, according to the agenda, let's start with the presentations. So, some housekeeping rules first. Every expert will have 20 minutes. So, according to the agenda, firstly, you will be sharing your presentations first, and if you have issues concerning screen sharing, we can help you. And after each presentation, also please close your mic as well as screen sharing. And if you are over time, maybe I will give you a reminder. And for those of you who will not be speaking, please switch off your microphone. So the first speaker would be Mr. Feng Xiangzhang.
Mr. Feng Xiangzhao, Deputy Director of Energy and Environmental Policy Research Division, Policy Research Center for Environment and Economy, Ministry of Ecology and Environment. Let's welcome. Thank you, Wei Wei. Can you see my slides? Okay, I'll start. First, it is my great pleasure to meet you all here in this way to participate in this forum. Well, my topic is a little bit different from what introduced by Wei Wei. Well, my topic is a discussion on synergy of pollution reduction and carbon reduction. Well, first, the introduction of my institute. I'm from the Policy Research Center for Environment and Economy under Ministry of Ecology and Environment. It is like a think tank of the ministry, providing important policy consultation and decision support. I belong to the Environment and Economy Research Center, and we work on the climate change as well as atmospheric environment. Whereas for the pollution reduction and carbon reduction, it is our main research field. For many years, we have received support from the Energy Foundation to conduct a series of activities. Today, I'd like to talk about a series of activities regarding the reduction of pollution and carbon. And we are more talking about synergetic control. Starting from last year, the reduction of pollution and carbon have become a hot word. I will mainly talk about 6 areas. First, starting from the second half of last year, pollution reduction and carbon reduction has become a very hot topic, and now it has become a long-term strategy in China. Since October last year, there were several important meetings and plans and documents. You can already see it has been a very important strategy, and since Central Economic Conference, it points out we need to further reduce pollution and carbon emission. On March the 15th this year, at the 9th meeting of the Central Financial and Economic Committee, it further points out to further reduce pollution and carbon to meet the 2030 carbon peaking target. Well, in the 14th five-year plan and the long-term goals for 2030, also saying that we need to further conduct the carbon and pollution reduction. And also at the 29th Collective Study of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee points out that the synergetic co-control has become a very important way for the green transformation of the economic and social development. Whereas for China right now, we are attaching high importance to this. And for me, I'd like to talk about our research and work in the past decade regarding the carbon and pollution reduction, mainly in the theories research as well as the policy formulation, as well as some industrial and city cases. So first, let's look at the theories, mainly the synergetic control of the pollutants and the greenhouse gas. Well, in the past, we were mainly talking about synergetic control, a synergetic effect. So as for these several words, they're different in Chinese, and also they have different connotation in English. Well, its actual meaning, according to our research, actually we have some of our interpretation for this. Synergy is some subjective, objective phenomenon. Synergetic effect is more quantified or monetized. And synergetic control means to use some measures or methods to give the full play to the effect of synergy to enhance the benefit. Well, as for the economic meaning of synergy, it means positive externality. Well, through this synergy and the synergetic control, we can have already optimized resource allocation to save the cost for management and the governance, to improve governance efficiency so as to have better effect. Well, from 2014, since UN fifth climate change evaluation report, we can see that this is from the third evaluation report in 2011. It attaches high importance to the synergy. And in the fifth assessment report, this slide can very directly show you what do I mean. Whereas for economy or for a region, energy security is very important. Then we need to have some policies or have some investment to guarantee the energy security and also to guarantee carbon reduction. So let's have a look at these policies. To implement these policies, it means we need some cost and investment. Well, actually, we can have multiple goal synergy. The effect is better than implementing these policies one by one. It is better to save cost. The final effect is like 1 + 1 + 1 bigger than 3. So why do we talk about co-control for carbon and pollution reduction? From this slide, you can see that our greenhouse gas emission source and the current air pollutants, no matter primary pollutants or secondary pollutants, actually they come from the same source, like coming from fossil fuel and agriculture, husbandry, and some like forest fire, etc. So actually they come from the same source of emission. Well, for control of synergy, it is related with some administrative departments. For example, NDRC, comparatively speaking, it covers a wide range with macro control. It is also called a small state council, and also ecology and environment departments and some other ministries like Ministry of Industry and Information, Transportation, Agriculture, Housing, Forestry, etc. So synergetic control comes from all the emission sources, no matter transportation, industry, or energy sectors, etc. They are the main entities to implement the synergetic control. Well, for synergetic control to realize pollution and carbon reduction, where can we do these works? Well, in the left, here we list some of the regular sources for air pollution, like the power plants, steel, cement production, etc., as well as chemical plants, transportation, as well as oil and mineral exploration industries. These are very important industries, and we regularly pay high attention for environment control. And in the right, this is CO2 emission sectors in China. You can see the structure from the right. Well, in China, the CO2 emission is mainly from the power sector and industry and transportation. These are the three main sources for CO2 emission. They account for 90%. So it corresponds to the priorities to control the air pollution. So in these areas, we can conduct synergy and co-control. Specifically speaking, we need policies or some measures to realize this control. We need some like directives or command, etc., like plan, action plan, like energy standard in the industry or some energy standard in the transportation industry, etc. All these are important policy tools. And also we have some economic incentives. For example, with the fuel tax. In China, we don't have carbon tax. Some European countries, they have both carbon tax and fuel tax. And then for carbon emission transaction and tax reduction or subsidy, etc. So apart from these two categories, there's another category. It is not bonding, but it can receive more attention from the population. This is more like education type advocates. For example, on the 22nd September, we have the Green Day and WWF Day and the Earth Day, as well as national energy conservation and emission reduction actions. All these are also measures for the synergetic control. Well, in practice, policies need some specific technical measures to realize, like energy or power sectors. They can use some clean coal utilizing mechanisms or to use renewable energy to generate power, or use some energy efficiency improvement measures to use waste gas, waste heat. All these comprehensive technologies can help us to realize co-control. And in recent years, like in North China, there is a promotion of the clean heating technology. All these are important measures, and in transportation field, we can use clean fuels to replace the petrol. Or right now, in China, we are enhancing the promotion of the pure EV, as well as rail transport in China, like metro or light rail. All these are very important technical measures. The third is about the interpretation of the synergetic policy of pollution reduction and carbon reduction. First, let's review the past. Carbon reduction and pollution reduction, for the first time for it to appear in the laws and regulations, it was in the Air Pollution Prevention Law in 2015. In the Article 2, it points out that we need coordinated control of many different air pollutants. So this is kind of law to realize, to regulate this. And also relevant ministries and departments have issued different policy documents pointing out clearly that we need co-control. For example, in 2018, there was a blue sky defense wall, which was issued by the State Council, clearly pointed out that we have clear targets for a synergy to reduce the emission of the main air pollutants, to synergetically reduce the greenhouse gas emission. And then there was the institutional reform of the State Council. With that backdrop, we have pointed out this target. And then in the 13th five-year plan to control the greenhouse gas emission, it pointed out the synergetic control of carbon emission and air pollutants emission. Since 2018, environment departments have issued several documents to further emphasize the synergetic control, as well as the VOC control and air pollutants integrated control, etc. All these are clearly pointed out in the targets issued by the documents of the Ministry of Ecology and the Environment. In January 2021, that is this year, Ministry of Ecology and the Environment issued the guiding opinions on coordinating and strengthening work related to climate change and ecological and environment protection. This is a comprehensive top-level design. And then in May and July this year, there are two documents issued to better implement the guideline issued in January. For example, in May, the documents was about the source control of the projects with high energy consumption and high pollution. And then in July, this document is about the carbon emission incorporated into the environment assessment, covering several areas, also conducting the pilots in several main provinces. And here I'd like to talk about this top-level design issued in January. This is issued by Ministry of Ecology and Environment. I participated in relevant works according to the requirement of the ministry. At that time, I did some interpretation on the media. It highlights the following 5 areas. The first is to pay attention to systematic planning and promote the integration of the strategic planning, highlight synergies and promote integration of policies and regulations for international cooperation. For the strategic planning, emphasizing to strengthen macro strategic planning, strengthen the organic connection of planning. Well, according to the documents of the ministry, we have very well showcased this idea. And then the carbon peaking actions. Well, for the policies to face climate change on the law and regulation level, right now, we don't have a high-level legislation for this, so we need to accelerate the legislation on climate change and to promote the introduction and the implementation of regulations on carbon emission trading management. So this will be issued this year or next year. And then to promote the integration of standard systems. We'll further conduct the air pollutants and the greenhouse gas emission co-control. And then for the overall integration of environmental and economic policies, like in May, the document was more about this area. Well, as for institutions, we are accelerating this work. Well, for the investigation and survey, in 2021, we have a new environment assessment survey, especially in the power sector. We have done this synergy work. So based on the environment survey, we can conduct the greenhouse gas emission accounting. And then we have an integration with the assessment, especially the environment assessment. We have done some pilot works. Then for the monitoring system, there's also a document about monitoring system to incorporate the greenhouse gas monitoring into the monitoring activities of several important industries like power sector, oil and gas exploration sectors, etc. And then for supervision and law enforcement, we're also enhancing our work on this. For synergetic control, we are tightening the supervision of some key enterprises with law enforcement interfered in this. Well, for pilot work, apart from the aforementioned incorporating carbon emission into the environment evaluation, and also right now in some places and in some industries, we are conducting air quality standard and carbon emission standard pilot work. Globally speaking, at the climate convention, like the biodiversity convention, we are further implementing these conventions or agreements. And now I'd like to talk about some cases in some industries or some cities. Here, this is research in some industries, including steel, power, transportation, coal, chemical industries, etc. This is about the cement industry. We have simulated some technologies to improve energy efficiency, to replace the original fuels or to reduce dust emission, etc. Here we have some structural reduction or technical reduction roadmaps. We did some simulation work. In the end, we find out that to realize a low carbon scenario, so this is a CO2 emission situation that we simulated. This is for cement industry. We can realize the peaking as early as possible. And here, this is a NOx reduction. It can be effectively reduced. Well, when comparing the synergetic reduction, a lot of the NOx control combined with CO2, the effect is weaker, while the CO2 measures has obvious effect on the NOx control. So it is more about improving energy efficiency. Well, this is a cost analysis. As for the comprehensive low carbon scenario, the cost increase will force us to further pay attention to the reduction of CO2 and NOx. Last one is about some city cases of energy saving and carbon reduction. So this is a pilot in Tangshan. Well, we know that in the north region, Tangshan City is a place under a very high pressure. And also, it has comparatively high greenhouse gas emission. Well, comparing to France and Italy, these are like equal to these countries regarding the emission. In 2018, with the Blue Sky Defense Action Plan, we have analyzed the measures, and based on the data we collected, we are analyzing their synergetic reduction work. Well, in the end, we analyzed these 12 measures, which can help to reduce pollutants by about 10 million tons. Well, mainly in 2018, it was close to 8% of the CO2 emission reduction. So these measures are mainly based on the availability of the data. But to realize the co-control, the effect will be much better. And some data of some sectors were hard to get. So through our analysis, you can see that these are mainly coming from their pillar industries to reduce emission, mainly from the steel industry. They have high potential for synergetic control. Last year, we concluded this research project. I used this LEAP model to analyze the steel industry in Tangshan, considering structural emission reduction and some reform to the industrial structures, as well as some CO2 tax, etc. I did this simulation through this model. Considering these factors, it can effectively realize a synergetic control. Here, for the integrated control, their steel industry can realize peak in around 2030. The peak level is comparatively low. And also for enterprises, they can save the environment tax. So that's all for me. Wei Wei.
Thank you very much, Mr. Feng, for sharing national policies on this, as well as specific analysis of the sectors and cases. Actually, Mr. Feng and the following representatives all already bought air tickets to Changsha, but because of COVID, he could not come. So let's move on. The next speaker, Mr. Xiong Huawen, Director, Energy and Environment Center, Energy Research Institute NDRC. And he will be talking about energy transformation pathways for promoting synergy of pollution reduction and carbon reduction. Director Xiong, please share your screen. Director Xiong, please.
好的，好的。好了，好。
There seemed to be something wrong. Technical issues, some technical issues. Okay, we can see your screen now. Distinguished colleagues, good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to share with you the energy transformation pathways for promoting synergy of pollution and carbon reduction. Just now, Dr. Feng also mentioned that we have the strategic outline at the national level, which is very clear since the Central Economic Work Conference of last year to the 29th group study in this April, or have clear goals for this. So we have very clear strategies at the national level. And in terms of energy, energy is actually the for pollution and carbon reduction and synergy, it's a pillar or the main field. For the green transition of economic development and society, energy should play a major role or the major field where it can happen. So that is why we say the reduction of pollution and carbon need to focus on energy sector. Firstly, it has an innate scientific foundation. Carbon reduction and pollution reduction can be coordinated because they come from the same source and same processes, especially in the energy sector. We can see that for the discharge of major air pollutants as well as GHG, energy sector contributed to more than 70% of this share. And secondly, the synergy can share the same method. We can achieve synergy because they share the same method. During the 12th and 13th five-year plan period, pollution reduction focused more on end-of-the-pipe treatment. But in the future, for breakthroughs in pollution control, we need to stress on the system and comprehensive treatment at the source. Using this method, the synergy of reduction is closely related to energy transition. At the end of the pipe treatment, it's difficult to coordinate this, but with the synergy, it is much easier now. Thirdly, they also have a good foundation in practice because they have the same pathway, same major players, sectors, and regions. So from different perspectives, we can see that we can coordinate these two efforts and form synergy in between. Since 2013, since the Air 10 rules, the energy transition has achieved good progress. No matter in the past or in the future, the synergy is very good. On the left-hand side, we can see, actually this is a study done by Zhang Qiang. At the 10 air rules, the PM 2.5 concentration drop mainly come from mostly from end-of-the-pipe treatment of the industries because of some specific reasons at that stage. But the second largest contribution comes from the restructuring of energy mix, which accounts for about 33%. In the past, pure reliance on end-of-the-pipe treatment only yielded limited results for air quality improvement. But in the future, for energy transition, for carbon reduction and pollution reduction, this will play a bigger role. For For example, the clean heating in northern China. Such measures can help restructure the energy mix, and it will also reduce the discharge of air pollutants, the emission of CO2, and improvement of air quality. In the future, many of the groups are studying this as well. For the phase 2 goals of WT2, and to build a beautiful China in by 2030 in terms of air quality, without the synergy between reduction of pollution and carbon, using the conventional methods will not be enough. For example, the end of the pipe treatment will not help us to meet the goal in air quality. To reach our goal of carbon peaking and neutrality, we need to incorporate energy transition, energy efficiency, etc., to improve air quality, to create synergy between reduction of carbon and pollution. During the 14th five-year plan period, what are the general pathways for creating such synergies? For the top-level layout, firstly, we need to coordinate our targets. Green, safety, and economic development need to be balanced. Energy transition and synergy are closely linked, but for energy itself is a foundation for national economy and its safeguards. The energy sector has another target. Using energy transition, we need to achieve multiple targets, and we need to coordinate this target. For the green target, it focuses more on reduction of pollution and carbon, but it also needs to highlight safety as well as economic benefits or economic performance. So we need to coordinate those different fronts. For the specific tasks, we need to do 3 tasks. We need to control the total quantity. And in terms of structure, including production and supply structure and demand structure, need to be optimized. And the layout mainly refers to the consumption, updates in different regions of China, and also how to transmit energy. It's also in line with the reduction of pollution and carbon. For those areas require better air qualities, can we use distributed local energy sources or the decentralized transmission of energy? All this actually closely linked to our goals. With clear pathways, we need to implement the measures in policies, measures, mechanisms. We need to have guarantees so that the synergy can be truly achieved in practice. So we need to coordinate indicators, responsibilities, mechanisms, institutions, policies, frameworks, so that the synergy can truly be created in practice. On the right-hand side, I have break down the targets. It's not that detailed. So we may work on 4 fronts mainly. Firstly, about the total control, total amount control. Energy and efficiency should be our primary methods in the control both total energy consumption and intensity. Energy efficiency actually is the primary resources for our work because it can help us to reduce energy demand at the source. So if we can reduce this, the pollutants discharge can be reduced in synergy. I believe this is the best method to create synergy. And why do we need to control both energy consumption and intensity? For the total consumption amount, if we cannot control this, we could not optimize the entire system or reduce the total discharge, because all this hinges on the total energy consumption. If the energy consumption amount of this is on the rise, then we do not have very good support for create synergy. And secondly, about the energy mix. While controlling the total demand or consumption, we need to have stricter control of the fossil fuel consumption because it's the largest source of GHG and the pollutants. So it should be our highlight. So in energy supply and consumption, we need to control the consumption of fossil fuels with the focus on coal. So during the 14th five-year plan, we'll have major targets. And the coal consumption need to peak before 2030. So in the 14th five-year plan, the increase in terms of amount and speed need to be reduced. So this is also very important. And we will try to peak coal consumption even sooner. So the reduction should be even larger. And during the 14th five-year plan, the coal consumption should enter the plateau period, with the share dropping to 50%. And thirdly, for non-fossil fuels, we need to vigorously develop this, including renewables, wind, PV, solar, as well as hydro and nuclear energy. They need to play a bigger role in our new energy mix with a larger share. For non-fossil fuels, during the 14th five-year plan, they need to increase even faster. Currently, it's very difficult to increase renewable energy share in the stocking generation plants, but the new ones should be more focusing on renewable energies. And also the wind power need to be developed as well. And fourthly, for the end users, in terms of energy production, the non-fossil fuels need to be enhanced. As for the consumption, the end consumption, we should have electrification. However, this means that we need to have clean electricity. So the end user's direct and indirect emission of carbon will be slashed. So, in end users, we can use electricity to replace some fossil fuels, including coal. to create a synergy of reduction of pollution and carbon. And next question. Power demand will increase, and the electricity coming from non-fossil fuels will also increase, so it will have higher requirements on the flexibility and the reliability of the grid. So to establish a new power grid will be highlighted. So that is why the Central Office of Finance also mentioned this recently. And for the key measures to create a synergy during the 14th five-year plan, the priority are on three fronts, including curbing the blind development of energy-intensive projects and emission-intensive projects. And also this requires the control of the total emission and the intensity. So we need to switch away from the projects that are not in line with the requirements. So I believe this is the core for the synergy. Also, we need to follow good principles in this regard. Firstly, we need to understand the general picture. And secondly, we need to give them tailored handling methods instead of a one-thing-fitting-all method. And thirdly, we need to do the source prevention control. The MEEE and NDRC have made targeted policies for this. And fourthly, we need to establish a long-term mechanism. So the control should be sustained. We need to have compliance oversight and process oversight. And fifthly, currently we are focusing more on the new projects, but for the existing projects that are already underway, we need to optimize them as well, including how to update them, and so that they can make room for the new and better production capacities in the future. And secondly, about coal. Firstly, from power generation, secondly, industrial users, and thirdly, civil bulk coal users. For the first two, a large reduction is more challenging because we have demands in this regard. But for the civil bulk coal and industrial coal using, I believe this is easier, and this is what we need to do, because this will create very good synergy. But during the 14th five-year plan, we see that it's getting more and more difficult, including in aspects of economy and finance. I believe those two areas need to be our highlight. We need to have the commercial model and policy and mechanism innovations. And thirdly, developing non-fossil energy to reduce pollution and carbon emission from energy sector. We need to focus more on non-fossil fuels, and those non-fossil fuels can be turned into electricity. So increasing the share of non-fossil fuels in power generation can play a bigger role. It's also something we won't regret, and it will be a long-term key measure. and in layout. The centralized and distributed systems need to be both developed, and also we need to step up the storage and distribution and transmission capacity of the grid. And we need to have the long-term absorption mechanism for renewables. For the tools and mechanisms, how to ensure coordination and make it effective. So we have a foundation, and the key tasks here including the foundation from coordinated planning, deployment, promotion, and assessment. We need to understand what integrated means here. It's not putting them simply together. In some degree, they are two separated tasks. We can't simply regard them as the same task or one task. We need to coordinate them and have overall considerations, because reduction of pollution and carbon have their own innate laws. So we cannot just put them simply together, so we need to have better coordination and linkage in between. And secondly, in terms of the safeguards as well as the measures and implementation tools, we need to coordinate the targets and the standards, because we have multiple targets, including air quality improvement targets, carbon intensity and total control targets, energy targets, etc., including energy intensity. So we need to coordinate those targets and standards or indicators first, and emphasis on both of them. And also we need to coordinate different departments. Currently, such work involves multiple departments. They have different responsibilities to create synergy. In practice, we need to first coordinate different departments and their responsibilities. They need to divide their responsibilities while at the same time form synergy in between, so that they can work in the same direction. And thirdly, institutional coordination. We are exploring on this front as well. We have still room for improvements. Just like mentioned before, in terms of laws, regulations, policies, standardizations, accounting, verification, etc., and oversight, as well as law enforcement assessment. To create a synergy, we still have a lot to do on this front, and still room for improvement. And finally, some thoughts. Just now, the moderator also mentioned that we need to be problem or issue-oriented. So I want to ask several questions about how to create synergy or challenges or highlights for future steps. Firstly, energy transition is a key word, and the reduction of pollution, the reduction of carbon emission, both are keywords. The three of them are similar in pathways, but they are different in specific aspects. Then how to coordinate them and balance them together. This requires comprehensive consideration. And finally, that means we need to coordinate safety, security, development, and emission reduction. So this is one of the major three goals. Economic and social development sometimes requires this, including the guarantee of the production factors, as well as how to be competitive as an economy at a lower cost of the production factors, while reduction of emission and the pollutants may pose some challenges in safety and security, how to guarantee the safe and secure operation of our economy and society. And we have different goals. We need to coordinate them because they're different in some specific areas or in certain conditions. Sometimes this will result in a little bit of a disputes in between. So this means comprehensive coordination because energy is important. And also price is also important to lower the cost, and also we need to meet the green targets as well. So in coordination, we may have priorities. For example, how to establish the synergy between reduction of pollution and emission while at the same time to promote the smooth running of the industrial chain. And for coal-fired power, how should it position itself in the new era? And while at the same time, we need to guarantee safety and security. This requires optimization of policies. I believe all these questions need answers in the future. And secondly, for the synergy, in the future, yes, sometimes they contradict with one another. Then how can we prioritize them or balance them? For example, for some pathways, they will result in reduced pollution and increased carbon, and vice versa. So with such contradictions, how can we prioritize them, and create a synergy in between? And how can we promote long-term synergy? And we will need to achieve 1 + 1 is bigger than 2 result. So we need to maximize the cost effectiveness. And also we need to prioritize in the proper way to optimize the policy mix. This is something worth pondering upon. And thirdly, the synergy is increasingly difficult or complicated in the future. In the past, we focused more on air pollutants or conventional ones, including PM2.5, NOx, SO2, and CO2 synergy. And this time, the synergy is more simple. But in the future, to improve air quality about the ozone layer and VOCs and NOx, how do they interact with one another, and how to promote the energy efficiency and reduction of emission in the future? We still have many challenges. We have done a lot of research in this front. Actually, the reduction of VOC will complicate the synergy creation in between. VOC control, we believe, requires more study. And we may include water, solid waste, as well as GHG. Such synergy should be promoted in a wider scope, and this will result in more challenges and uncertainties. So in the future, we need to explore more on such fronts. So this is my presentation. And your suggestions are welcome. Thank you.
好嘞，谢谢。
Thank you, Director Xiong. Director Xiong talked about the synergetic control of pollution and carbon emission reduction, about the policies, measures, and tools. He also pointed out the priorities in the future. Thank you, Director Xiong. And according to the agenda, let's move forward. Our next speaker is an expert from abroad.
The speaker, Eric. Eric is the research director for Center for Sustainable Governance, Institute of Environmental Strategies. He has rich experience on air pollution treatment, low carbon and sustainable development, especially focusing with the Asia Pacific. The topic of his speech is the governance for coal control in China and beyond. So Eric, now it's your turn. Please share your slides. Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
谢谢伟伟。
Thank you, Wei Wei.
Colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm speaking to you from Japan, about an hour from Tokyo. My name is Eric Zussman, and 我的中文的名字叫苏世文. And I used to live in China about 20 years ago or so. My Chinese is not so good these days, so 我就是用英文说.
So I'll speak in English, sorry.
My title of my talk is called Governance for Coal Control in China and Beyond, Steps Toward a One Atmosphere Approach. And I'd like to start off by highlighting, of course, the fundamental challenge that we're trying to address with co-benefits or co-control is, of course, air pollution and climate change. This is a big problem, but it's not only a problem in countries like China, it's also a problem in countries that are quote unquote developed countries. So for instance, you can see this diagram right here. And this picture is actually of human lung from two parts of Australia. One person living close to a power plant and another person living far away from a power plant. And so the impacts of this air pollution are very real, and they're not limited to places that we normally think of as having air quality issues. There is a global problem. And the challenge really then is for how do we move forward with this concept of co-benefits to address air pollution and climate change. This idea of co-benefits has been around for actually about 30 years. And you can see on some of these definitions here, I mean, some of the colleagues were defining co-benefits back in 2000. And there's been, as I'll show in just a bit, a lot of literature, of course, on co-benefits in China. I mean, you can see one of the definitions for co-benefits comes from one of our fellow panelists, Feng Xiangzhao from PRCE. So this concept has been around for a while, and it's useful to help us tackle air pollution and climate change at the same time. In fact, I would suggest it's also useful for tackling not just climate change, but a broad range of other sustainability needs and concerns. In fact, in my research institute, we've not only done work on the links between air pollution and climate change, but also, for instance, between the links between climate change and gender equity issues. So there are also such things as social co-benefits. And when we first started talking about co-benefits, a lot of times we would use diagrams like this, a very simple diagram to show that we're aiming for the intersection of some global and domestic needs, or global climate issues and domestic needs. But what we've seen over time is that there's been varying perspectives on co-benefits. So, I mean, many of us have already presented on, for instance, the linkages between CO2, carbon dioxide, and other conventional air pollutants such as SO2 or NOx. But one of the additional perspectives on co-benefits, what I might call an air pollution perspective, also focuses on what are known as short-lived climate pollutants. Short-lived climate pollutants. In English, we use this SLCP. And this includes things like black carbon, which is frequently part of your PM 2.5, as well as tropospheric ozone, which is a secondary pollutant. And these secondary pollutant comes from the breakdown of some of the, sometimes NOx or VOCs. It also can come from the breakdown of methane in the atmosphere. And by targeting some of these short-lived climate pollutants, you can mitigate climate change in the near term, over the next, some cases, even weeks, all the way up to about 10 years, as well as improve health and air quality. So there's really a few perspectives on co-benefits. One that has a sort of climate perspective, where we're aiming at CO2 and other air pollutants, or even other broader development concerns, and then also these short-lived climate pollutants. And this interest in co-benefits, both the sort of more climate-centered focus or the air pollution focus, I mean, this has really increased a great deal over the past 30 years. So this diagram shows you the number of articles in English that have been published on co-benefits or co-control. So you can see, I mean, back between 1996 and 2000, when the first set of articles came out, there were maybe about 20 or 30 articles over that 5-year period. But over the most recent 5-year period, that's closer to 18,000 articles. And the one thing that I would really like to highlight here is that in terms of the research on co-benefits, as you can already see from this workshop, the country that's done the most work on this concept is China. So out of all of these articles, about 80% or so are coming from or mentioning China. I mean, they're not only mentioning China, but China is a huge focal point for much of the work on co-benefits. And as already mentioned by other colleagues in China, a lot of times it's not just about the outcome, the co-benefits itself, but this broader co-control process, the 协同控制. I mean, there's been a rich amount of research on co-benefits in many cities. So this is work that's been done by the PRCE, and as I already mentioned, Dr. Feng, and there's also colleagues there that Li Liping and Tianchen Xiu, for instance, have done in Shangtan, where you move from just looking at these two different circles to using different types of energy or engineering models to actually estimate what might be the co-benefits of different interventions. And what they've showed, at least from a very traditional perspective, is not all of these interventions are going to be good for air quality and climate change. So in general, what we're trying to recommend for cities and countries is, in some cases, of course, you're going to need to do things that are only good for air quality. So you might need to install end of the pipe controls or FGDs on power plants or heavy industry. But the way to achieve co-benefits is to package this with other interventions that also save energy and reduce CO2. So it's in some cases, it's not about avoiding some of these end of the pipe measures, but packaging them in a way so that you can offset some of the increases in greenhouse gases. And so in the case of Shangtan, you would have to package, several of these different interventions together so that you get into this sort of sweet spot where you're reducing CO2 as well as in this case, SO2 or NOx. This leads me to my next point about packaging. So my colleagues and I, we've worked quite extensively with the United Nations Environment Program and several researchers from Europe and throughout Asia to look at, what might be some solutions in Asia that can deliver co-benefits. And we published a report about a year and a half ago or so called the Air Pollution in Asia and Pacific Science-Based Solutions. And what this report did is it identified 25 different types of solutions or measures that could lead to significant reductions in PM 2.5 and bringing Asia, about 60% of the population of Asia, into compliance with WHO interim targets on PM 2.5 by 2030. That's a significant improvement over what would be a business as usual or without policy scenario. In that case, you would have only about 10% of Asia within those standards. Basically, what we did for these 25 solutions is we broke them up into 3 different categories. The first set of measures are what we call conventional controls. And these conventional controls actually are a lot of your end of the pipe type of measures, types of things that you might install on power plants or even on vehicles that will reduce conventional pollutants, but will also lead to an increase in many cases in CO2. So to get back to the point about packaging or combining is then we also identified a series of what we call next stage measures. And these next stage measures are focusing on smaller sources of emissions that many of them that give rise to this black carbon, the SLCP. And they include things like open burning of waste and biomass. They also include strengthening inspection and maintenance of diesel vehicles. And this will give you a more air pollution-based co-benefit approach. And once again, this approach I don't think is a common or hasn't been received as much attention in China when we talk about co-control. And then the third set of measures are focusing a little bit more on your more traditional co-control or co-benefits approach. This includes everything from renewable energy to energy efficiency. It also includes public transport and electric vehicles. And the bottom line is for different countries and for different cities, you're going to need to draw from these 25 different measures and put together your own context-specific package. But if you do that, then you're going to be able to capture the near-term climate benefits, the long-term climate benefits, and also the air quality and health benefits. And I believe this report is also translated into Chinese if you're interested. Okay, now I want to get to my next point here. I put governance in my title for a reason. And the main reason I did that is because I think it's really important to highlight that much of the research, even these 18,000 articles on co-benefits, uses a series of models to identify different technologies and solutions and interventions that will help you achieve co-benefits. And I think that's really important, of course, but the other side of the story is that even though we have all of this research, the actual application and use of co-benefits as a tool for policymaking is still rather limited. I think it's gained a lot of attention and momentum in China, but also, I mean, outside of China, still rather limited. And I think the fundamental challenge here is this governance issue. So we've promoted, and this is not just us, but many organizations promoting, what we call multi-level, multi-stakeholder governance. I mean, basically, in order for the co-benefits or co-control to work, for 协同控制 to be effective, you need to deal with this vertical and horizontal fragmentation. In Chinese, it's the 条块风格, the 条 relationship and 块 relationship. And you also need to be able to bring in other actors outside of government. So setting up governance arrangements that facilitate coordination between and within levels of government will be really important for making co-benefits a reality. And, we can see this within China. I mean, I think there's been a lot of progress. I know that the Ministry of Environment and Ecology, or Ministry of Ecology and Environment, for some time was managing the climate change portfolio or climate issues, but that's recently gone back to the NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission, the Fagaiwei. But for me, I think balancing this relationship between these two agencies and then the other sectoral agencies is critical. And then I think the other side of this, so that's a horizontal relationship. And then I think the other relationship, of course, is between the local development and reform commissions and the local ecology and environment bureaus. So this type of issue, I mean, has been around in China for a long time. I think there's been a lot of progress, but even 20 years ago when I was doing my research in China, this 条块风格 was sort of a fundamental challenge, and I think it's still, a big issue for co-benefits. So we need to think constructively about this multi-level, multi-stakeholder governance to make co-benefits a reality. And I think if China can demonstrate good examples of how they're doing this, this can be something that's shared outside of China and also promote co-benefits in other parts of the world, especially Asia. And so I'd just like to conclude with a quick case study that demonstrates how this has been done in the country that I'm from, originally the United States, and then conclude that point with a broader point about the global environmental agenda. So when it comes to governance, one of the states, so that in the United States, one of the 50 states that has made progress with co-benefits is California. And this has been because it's thought very carefully about the design of its institutional arrangements. So the institutions have been set up well, and the process for developing policies has been set up well for the California Global Warming Solutions Act. This is the big climate policy in California that's been continually updated since 2006. And it was initially promoted by, I think you're very familiar with this gentleman over here, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like I said, in 2006, but it's been updated continuously. And the key really here has been that they've taken the technical analysis, many of the same types of analyses that have gone into the sort of co-benefits work that you've already seen from other presenters here. And they've used that technical analysis not only to divide up their climate change targets, but they've also estimated some of the other benefits of these climate change targets, and done that while assigning them to different targets. So they've done good technical analysis, estimated the co-benefits of that technical analysis. And then they've set up a process where basically every 2 to 3 years or so, they give the different industries, the agricultural farmers, and other stakeholders a very clear vision of what the different targets are going to be and what are the different benefits that can be achieved, the different co-benefits that can be achieved. So they give them a clear idea ahead of time before the policy is actually enacted. And in that 2 to 3 year period, they give them a chance to comment and also prepare. And what happens is many of the industries start to move early on these things. So you have this sort of preparatory time to move forward. And also the other thing that they've done, which has obviously become very common now, is they set up midterm targets and also a long-term target, which they keep on updating. So on the process side, this preparation a few years ahead enables industry to enter early. And also you get some public comment. And it's also guided, like I said, by midterm and long-term targets. And these things are in some ways very familiar to China nowadays. So on the process side, it's been quite good. And then on the institutional side, on the structural side, what they've done is they've set up the governor's office to help lead this process. But then they've also set up a coordination team. That coordination team works very closely with the California Environmental Protection Agency, as well as the California Air Resources Board. So you have the Environmental Protection Agency that looks at all different impacts, the Air Resources Board, which is focused on air pollution, and then many other relevant agencies that are focusing on whether it's transportation or agricultural concerns. So these different agencies work together. And then 2 other groups, these other purple circles here, make contributions. One is this Economic and Technology Advancement Committee. And this is basically research institutions that are providing the technical analysis I mentioned previously, doing the type of co-benefits analysis, both in terms of more traditional co-benefits like the climate focused, as well as SLCPs, short-lived climate pollutants. And last but not least, you have this Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. This organization focuses on social issues. So if people are going to lose jobs, or if some of the changes in policies are going to lead to more pollution in certain areas, then they're trying to make sure that the poor people do not get exposed to higher levels of pollution. So, they're taking in consideration some of the social impacts. So the bottom line is the process and institutions in California were very well designed to support a co-control approach. And I think China has some of this as well too. And I think sharing that would be very important, once again, outside of China. And the last point that was very important in California is public communications. So the co-benefits analysis, the economic, environmental, and social benefits have been consistently promoted of this plan for this plan. So if you drive down the street in California, I haven't been back to California in a number of years now, but if you drive down the street, you could see signs or advertisements highlighting the different benefits of this program. And these were communicated quite actively to individuals. So for instance, in terms of using energy efficient vehicles, you could see that they would promote how much money you would save in gas. So individualizing the benefits can increase the public support. And California's done a good job of that as well. Okay, then I'd like to just conclude by saying that this California case and several other cases from inside and outside China are in our new guide on co-benefits. And you can find that guide on our website or contact me. And you can also join our Asian Co-Benefits Partnership. And the reason I really want to underline the importance of promoting co-benefits and moving more towards what we call a one atmosphere approach is because in the future, I think the future sustainable development agenda could really benefit from looking more at co-benefits. Currently, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the global set of sustainable development goals don't have a goal on air pollution. They have one on climate change. But I think if we can demonstrate what China has done on co-benefits, improve the governance on co-benefits, this could really contribute to a global goal on air pollution and its integration with climate change, health, and social concerns. That would be good for everybody. So I'll stop right there. 非常感谢.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. I think Eric mentioned several times about the importance of governance for implementing the co-control work and realizing the co-benefit. 我觉得中国其实也是在做相关的。
I believe China is also doing the relevant work. Some of the provincial and municipal governments are establishing groups, leading groups for the synergy. Actually, we are over time. We need to move on. The next speaker, Mr. Shi Guangming, Director of the Institute of Environment Economics, Hunan Research Academy of Environmental Sciences. His topic is carbon peaking roadmap for Hunan. So, Mr. Shi, please. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to talk to all of you about Hunan's work in this regard. In September the 22nd, during the general debate at the United Nations General Assembly, President Xi proposed that we need to achieve carbon peak between 2030 and carbon neutrality between 2060. This is now a hot topic in China. In December the 12th, during the Climate Ambition Summit, he declared that by 2020, China will lower its carbon dioxide emission per unit of GDP by over 65% from the 2005 level. And in March, in the Central Financial Committee meeting, this was further reiterated. And also on 21st of September, during the Climate Summit, President Xi reiterated the targets. And he mentioned that we would not invest in new coal-fired plants outside China, and this shows our commitment to the goals. Coal neutrality actually refers to the 6 strategies in the Kyoto Protocol, as well as some non-CO2 emission, including nitrous oxide, HFC, etc. Now, the carbon peaking actually refers to only the energy sector. And we have a timeline at the bottom internationally with important meetings lined up. And for the carbon peaking and control carbon neutrality, the times is very limited compared with developed countries had. Since 2006, our carbon emission ranked top in the world. If we want to peak before 2030, the total reduction need to reach 10 billion tons. And so in this 30 years, we need to reduce CO2 emission by this much. So that means every year we are facing a huge tasks and pressure. From 1990 to 2020, this is our energy consumption as well as energy mix. We can see that the energy mix is heavily reliant on coal, supported by oil, gas, and non-fossil fuels. And to reduce CO2 emission in this regard is very challenging. the experts mentioned that the reduction of coal will help create synergy and reduce pollutant discharge. But besides coal, what else can we use? Currently, the air quality in China, after the 12th and 13th five-year plan period's efforts, reached the standard of 30 UG. This is WHO's old standards. The newest standard is about 5 UG per cubic meters, so it's even more stricter. So the end of the pipe measures were exhausted by us to reach 30 UG or 35 UG per cubic meters. In the next step, for carbon neutrality and carbon peak and restructuring the energy mix will help us more to improve our air quality. For the developed countries in carbon peaking, the pathways are like this. I believe this can help us to better understand what should we do to peak carbon emission. For Germany, in 1979, it peaked its carbon emission. The emission of other sectors all dropped besides transport. The transport emission actually grew, and for Britain it's similar. It peaked in 1973. Its power and industry emissions and building emissions all dropped, and its transport emission is also growing. They have the similar pathways, but for the US, it's different. For US, it peaked. It actually, in 1974, its industry emission peaked. But why it peaked in 2005? We can see the yellow part. This is the power generation sector. It did not use clean energy to replace coal-fired power plants. It finished this in 2015. So in 2004, it peaked in 2005. So we could not copy their pathway because we don't have such long period of time. And I believe carbon peaking, judging by the pathways of developed countries, we need to find cleaner energy for replacement. And in industries, we need to increase energy efficiency and phase out the energy-intensive method in industries. And this shows the social and economic development at the carbon peaking period of major developed countries. For Britain in 1973, when it peaked, its urbanization is about 70.7.1%, Germany 72.8%, US 79.9%, Japan 91.2%. So mostly its urbanization is around 70 or more than 70%. Urbanization requires energy-intensive products like cement and steel or glasses because we need to build more buildings for living. After urbanization finishes, for country, all those are all those will be over capacity. Then we can phase them out gradually to reduce energy consumption. Judging from developed countries, I believe they can give us 3 ideas to pondering upon. After urbanization and industrialization, its share of agriculture dropped, and its industry is about 30%. But tertiary industry developed fast. And secondly, the supply and demand of energy-intensive products changed. It depends on urbanization. After it finishes, the demand for cement, glasses, and steel dropped. So this will help them to peak. And urbanization is correlated to carbon emission, but it's not an absolute correlation. For Switzerland, its urbanization is about 66% when it peaked. And for Hunan, in 2010 to 2019, the left-hand side shows the changes in the third industries. It followed almost the same path of different countries, like the agriculture dropped, and the secondary is also dropping from 45 to 38%, and tertiary industry is increasing to about 50%. In the next step, for the secondary industry, it will further drop to about 30%, and the tertiary industry will increase to almost 60%. So it's more like a development law, because we don't need some of the products at that point. And this shows GDP growth, because at the later stage or middle stage of urbanization, economy is not driven by investment anymore, but by consumption. So for innovative development, it needs to be driven by consumption instead of infrastructure construction. Urbanization rate grew from 52% in 2010 to 58% currently during the 14th five-year plan. By 2025, urbanization of Hunan will reach 63%, so it will be growing by 1% annually during the 14th five-year plan. We still need energy-intensive products like the steel and also glasses, because when the rural population turned into urban population, we need commercial centers, schools, squares, housing. So we need all the energy-intensive products. And the energy consumption as well as the economic growth during the recent years of Hunan. On the left-hand side, we can see the elasticity of energy consumption. It's the gray one. It's almost zero. So we use very low energy consumption to fuel fast economic growth, and this is among only a few provinces in China. And on the right-hand side, we see the per capita carbon emission and the per unit of GDP carbon emission. According to studies, the per capita emission will peak first, and then the per GDP unit carbon emission will peak later. So our emission actually peaked in about in 2011, and we can see that this is the decoupling of carbon emission with energy consumption. We can see that from 2011 to 2019. Actually, carbon emission is not linked with energy consumption. And in 2015, we had a very strong decoupling, and for other years, we may have a weaker decoupling. And we can see the accumulative amount. So the carbon emission is less than 0.2, while the GDP continuously expanded. So we use a very small growth of carbon emission to fuel fast economic growth. Compared with other provinces, in terms of energy consumption, we are in the middle. lower than Guangdong province. But compared with Jiangxi and Shanghai, our emission is higher. And in energy consumption mix, we mainly use coal because we do not have oil or gas reserves inside Hunan. So we also mainly use coal. It accounts for 57.64% of the total consumption. In industrial mix, coal-fired plants used 23%, and steel and building materials are the following two. For the coal-fired consumption of coal, we are not among the top in China. And this shows the fossil fuel burning and carbon emission. In the past 10 years, after 2010, and all this, those fossil fuel burning are mainly for coal-fired power generation, because we do not have oil reserve inside Hunan, and it dropped from 40% in 2010 to about 20% in 2019. And the emission also dropped. But why do we need to study when can we peak now, at this moment? Because, yes, our industries is now reaching a peak. Like the cement and steel and other energy-intensive projects could not be launched, so our industries can peak now. But I'm not sure whether transport and buildings emission will or will not increase, because we're at the later stage of urbanization. We haven't finished our urbanization. We are at 58% in about urbanization, and it needs to reach 63% in the 14th five-year plan. In 15th five-year plan, it needs to reach 69%. So with better lives, and we need more of the construction. I believe so. Emission will increase, but it will increase by only small margin. So we have done some calculation on this as well. So this is the GDP contribution as well as energy consumption per sector in 2017. We can see that for energy intensive, on the left-hand side, we see the GDP. The steel and smelting and rolling of ferrous metals contributed to about 1% of GDP, but its energy consumption accounts for 12.05%. And for non-ferrous metals, contribute to about 3% of GDP, but it consumed about more than 12% of energy. So the energy consumption is not equivalent with its economic contribution, but it is innate demand in the process of urbanization, so we cannot phase out them now. And also, it's the same with power. But we need to use power in socio-economic development, so we cannot phase them out now. So in the next step, with renewables, PV, hydro, wind, we can replace more and reduce the energy consumption of power sector. And for the ferrous metal and non-metallic minerals, I believe urbanization enters into the later stage. The overcapacity can be phased out. From 2010 to 2019, the cement and steels and also glasses are mostly used by real estate. for the cement is about 110 million cubic tons. So the consumption and the supply was actually balanced. All of them were used up by real estate. And the same with the steel. The steel production is about 24 million tons. And its consumption is about 60 million tons at the same year. All of them were used in real estate because we need to build new buildings at this stage. Some may worry that when phasing out the energy-intensive sectors, it might impact our economy. So we have done analysis on this. So if we phase out their capacity by 5, 10, or 15%, what will be the impact on other sectors? So actually, it will have almost no impact on other sectors except for the beneficiary of coal as well as coking and oil. So the impact is not large. And non-metallic minerals, the situation is the same. It will have a little impact on other sectors, but it will consume a lot of energy. Petrochemicals, so ferrous metals smelting, they are similar. So based on the previous analysis, we try to analyze if we phase out non-ferrous metals, non-metallic minerals, and iron and steel. After the 14th five-year plan, the CO2 emission of industry will drop by about 1/3. It's not that large. And in energy supply, we have power quantity issue because we are not heavily reliant on power. We do not have large power shortage. But in terms of load, it's quite intense. So during the 14th five-year plan, we need to finish all the coal-fired plants construction so that they will reach about 20 million kilowatts. And the building energy consumption from 2010 to 2019, the public buildings energy consumption actually rose because we are in the process of urbanization. We need so many buildings. But for the rural areas after 2015, the floor area actually remained the same, while the urban floor space actually increases. The per capita household floor area actually is about 40 square meters. Is in line with the NDRC standard. And during the 14th five-year plan, this will further expand because about 6 or 7 million of rural population will become urban population. So for every year, we'll reuse about 400 billion tons of cement. And for the household energy consumption, actually the provincial average level is less than the national level. But that's because we do not have very good natural gas reserves in Hunan. So the per capita gas consumption is lower than the national average. The rural standard, it's almost the same because they can use coal. But for the urban areas, it's much lower. So actually, I believe Hunan people actually is not that lucky. And this is about the energy intensity. We can see that we are a little bit higher than the national average. National average is about 29. Our level is about 35. It's a study done by Tsinghua University. And for the urban residential buildings, the level is almost the same as the national average. As for the vehicles, we didn't include air cargo transport or water cargo transport. For the entire province, the road cargo transport is quite developed. In the next step, the growth will come from residential car ownership. With their growing income, we all want to buy cars. So if we do not control this, according to our estimation, the transport CO2 emission will increase by a large margin. In terms of buses, according to our study, we can achieve full electrification between 2030 because we're now using clean energy fueled vehicles or buses. And according to the Department of Transport, they want to achieve this before 2035. But according to our study, I believe all the cars can be electrified between 2030 in Hunan. So the CO2 carbon emission from transport mainly come from car ownership by residents. But at the national level, we have a new energy vehicle development plan. So the new energy vehicle will grow by about 20%. So in the next step, I believe many of the private cars will be EV or new energy vehicles. So they will help reduce emission. So we can see that from different sectors as well as from top level downward, we need to stay committed to the national key tone. We will peak in different phases, and we will ensure the CO2 per unit of GDP will also reach the national standards. So we will peak before peak at about 2034-35. So we didn't consider the balance of power. So it will also impact our research from an upward method, including transport. In scenario 1, in 2029 or 2030, we will peak. So it will stand at about 330 million tons of CO2 emission. So actually, these two scenarios are similar. It's only differ by about 20 million tons. For the scenario 2, the gray line, we try to incorporate also phasing out of the coal in agriculture. We see that using clean energy to replace coal in agriculture, the power actually is not enough, because we need to use more power generated from coal-fired plants, resulting in higher CO2 emission. So we do not suggest blindly following orders in agriculture or in other sectors for full electrification, because we don't have many resources in this regard. including vehicles and new energy cars. Because if power is not come from clean energy, then it will result in higher CO2 emission. In scenario 2, for example, agriculture CO2 emission will drop, but for other sectors it will increase, particularly for power. Because some of the power are not from clean sources. According to our analysis, several aspects may impact our picking. Currently, industry is the main pillar for innovation-driven development. We need to transit or shift to advanced manufacturing. But this sector is more power intensive, and the power comes from coal-fired plants. So there is a contradiction in this regard, and in iron steel and other energy-intensive sectors. With better lives, the process is not that advanced. So the energy efficiency and the energy demand per unit of products need to be further reduced. So we need to still fuel development. And fourthly, with urbanization, car ownership will increase, so the emission from transport will also increase, may also increase. And fifthly, how to control energy demand in buildings and construction. So we would like to make several proposals as well. Past one, we need to do supply-side structural reform to phase out overcapacity and the restructuring steel and other sectors, and the use AI and new generation of information technologies like the energy information system for better energy efficiency. And secondly, we need to enhance energy efficiency for green industrial revolution with the new materials and new technology. We need to make a near zero plan and benchmarking the enterprises to help them to improve energy efficiency. This shows the energy-intensive products of Hunan. And compared with the national leading level, we can see that if we can match them, we can reduce CO2 emission by 6.92 million tons and reduce coal equivalents by 2.6 million tons. Yes, we are advanced in some of sectors. For example, for coal-fired plants, the gap is about just 80,000 tons. But for coking and other sectors, there's still a gap. And thirdly, we can restructure the energy mix and promote non-fossil energy, including hydro power, thermal, geothermal energy, wind power, to reduce the power generated by coal-fired plants and increase the share of clean energy in energy mix. And we need to restructure transport as well. At the government level, we need to provide guidance and encourage water transportation. And this is also included in our 14th five-year plan. Because we now heavily rely on road transport, we need incentives and government guidance to shift the road transport into rail and water transport. to reduce energy consumption in transport, and also we need to encourage the purchase of clean energy vehicles. We also have many more detailed suggestions, but for sake of time, I didn't include them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Shi. Thank you for your interpretation of the roadmap for the carbon picking in Hunan, as well as some practical measures. Well, just now the speakers have done the presentations for the first session for this afternoon. Thank you very much for your sharing. Well, because we are a little bit over time, sorry. And now let's have 5 minutes tea break. Let's come back at 4:20. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizer, including the Low Carbon Center. Thank you very much for your hard work coordinating all the activities. Thank you very much for realizing this session. Thank you very much. So let's have 5 minutes tea break. Let's come back at 4:25. Thank you.
喂，喂，李安，我们可以开始了吗？喂，李安，我们开始吧。喂，现场能听到吗？好的，好，非常欢迎大家回到现场。
Welcome back.
接下来我们继续探讨这个。
So let's continue to talk about the action plan. We will have 5 speakers in this session, and I will moderate this part. My name is Geng Yu. I'm from Institute for Sustainable Communities. So let's try to close before 6. Our first speaker comes from School of Environment, Tsinghua University, Associate Professor Dr. Zhang Nannan. The topic is Case on Co-Control of Greenhouse Gases and Air Pollutants in Jinan. Let's welcome Dr. Zhang. Dr. Zhang. Hello, can you hear Dr. Zhang? Dr. Zhang, please turn on your microphone. Hello? Can you hear me?
现在有声音了。
Okay.
好，现在可以了啊。
Okay. Well, according to the agenda, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting us here. Our technical team has been working on the evaluation and technical support to Hunan. Last July, together with the Environment Institute of Hunan, we are conducting the work under the guidance of Hunan government, and we have also supported Changsha for relevant environment work. mainly on the policy research of the atmosphere. And now we have turned towards carbon. I'd like to take Jinan as an example regarding the co-control of the greenhouse gas emission and air pollutants. I hope that we can form a fixed model on city level. Specifically speaking, I'll talk about three areas. The first is how to construct the data support system and a quantitative system. Previous speakers have talked about the top-level design at national level and how to implement this on city level. Well, in implementation, different cities may face synergy in some places and not synergetic situation in some other areas. How can we have a mature method to evaluate the synergy? So we have done some exploration. And in the end, I'd like to talk about the priority on the policies. So previous speakers have already talked about the reduction of pollution and the carbon emission have become a national strategy, and the different provinces and cities are implementing this strategy. We're formulating the implementation plan, and now this plan for action plan from MEE have been issued to different places for actual action plan. Well, nationally speaking, CO2 emission and PM 2.5 concentration situation. Here is a roadmap for the reduction of carbon emission and pollution. We have formulated this technical roadmap facing the environment protection system, taking PM 2.5 region standard as a target, considering how to formulate the roadmap while maximizing the effect. We are building this pollutants inventory from bottom to top. With this integrated inventory, we are conducting simulation of the scenarios, taking PM 2.5 region emission standard as the target, considering different scenarios, and then to evaluate the level of synergy, and then to provide suggestions to the policies. First, we build this from bottom to top pollutants inventory. Well, air pollutants and CO2 actually have the same sources, but in actual implementation in cities, there are some crossovers. In implementation, air pollutants inventory and the CO2 inventory actually are quite different. So taking Jinan as an example, we have done some coordination between these two inventories. The existing air pollutants inventory, generally speaking, has more detailed classification compared with CO2 inventory, like energy activity, industry, production, agriculture, and like there is like primary emission source and secondary emission source. There are crossover in all different fields. So we are in urgent need of this integrated emission inventory. Well, this is the air pollutants inventory of Jinan in 2019. We're building this integrated emission inventory. We hope that through this from bottom to top inventory, we can realize emissions source, inventory spatial resolution, and inventory structure unification. We will have a better understanding of the relationship between these sources to evaluate the effect of the synergy. So here, this is analysis of these two inventories formulated from bottom to top. The bottom-up CO2 inventory is bigger than the existing CO2 statistics. So this inventory is 10 million tons more than the official statistics. We have calculated the difference. Mainly, the energy activities is based on industry point sources. The energy consumption source and energy balance sheet, based on this, there are different results. And also the different industrial process and industrial enterprises accounting are also different. The volume is higher than the energy evaluation sheet. So based on primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of the inventory, we can better analyze the emission situation of different fields, industries, and enterprises. Based on the demands, primary, we have energy, fossil fuel combustion source. 88% of the CO2 emission is from this part. And then in secondary, there are power and steel, etc. By analyzing different industries, we are also analyzing different spaces. For example, in different emission space, have different industries. In this way, we can analyze in different hotspot grid. Through spatial technology, we can better screen our focus for monitoring. We can also analyze the consistency of different pollutants in different places. Like CO2 are highly correlated with some air pollutants. Like 90% of CO2 is highly correlated with the CO and sulfur dioxide emission. And then sulfur dioxide, NOx, and VOCs also have high correlation. And the next exploration is how to evaluate the level of synergy by different measures and different fields. How to balance the pollution and carbon reduction and CO2 reduction. The core is based on this RSM model developed by our group to build the quantitative correlation between pollution reduction measures, multiple pollutants, PM2.5 concentration, and CO2. So there are different pollutants. Some pollutants are synergetic with CO2. Some are not. So here we have a unified method or model so that multiple pollutants are turned into CO2 concentration. So by analyzing the reduction of the CO2 concentration, we can understand the result so that we will have a standard to evaluate the co-control. Of course, we have a condition that is to reach the standard. So this is to design different control scenarios. So based on the reduction measures, we are analyzing the situation of PM2.5 reduction standard. Then we analyze different fields, different measures. The core is RSM model to evaluate different industry, different fields, different measures. Each measure brings different contribution. to the pollutant and the CO2 reduction. We're converting this all into CO2 concentration, using it as a simplified indicator. Based on this simplified synergetic indicator, we have a brief evaluation of 7 major industries. Like in Jinan, we are analyzing this difference of the benefit, like pollution reduction, the dust makes the greatest contribution. Then for the carbon emission reduction benefit, mainly contributed from the adjustment of industrial structure and energy structure, then industrial pollution governance. But industrial pollution governance doesn't bring big benefit on the carbon emission reduction. So some fields in implementation indeed doesn't have carbon reduction benefit or doesn't have co-benefit or even negative co-benefit. So we did some further detailed analysis for CO2 reduction. Industrial structure adjustment and energy structure optimization contribute to 52% and 45% of the CO2 reduction. And then transportation structure adjustment and moving source pollution prevention contribute to less than 2% of the CO2 reduction. And industrial dust and other like agricultural source treatment doesn't bring to the CO2 reduction. Whereas for the contribution to the reduction of PM2.5 concentration, dust and other spatial source governance contribute to 46% of the reduction of the PM2.5 concentration reduction. So highest synergy level is the transportation regarding the co-benefit of reduction of pollution and carbon reduction. The highest one is transportation, and then industrial structure, and then energy structure, and then moving source. So the measures for energy structure, we have detailed analysis to see which area have higher benefit, including cogeneration in Jinan. The SI index is highest. We did a survey. We think that the pollution reduction through energy treatment, they have reached the standard. The unit pollutant reduction brings very high benefit to carbon reduction, but the potential for the pollution reduction is very small. And then industrial coal pressure reduction, etc. Well, based on this SI index, we're analyzing the different industrial structure adjustment measures. So in summary, we have analyzed this synergy index. Well, for cities with heavy pollution, SI is very suitable. For example, Jinan has very severe PM2.5 pollution and has gone large-scale pollution control and emission reduction, and the synergy benefit for future adjustment will be much better. But developed cities like Beijing and Shenzhen, the PM2.5 and other pollutants don't have very similar sources, so we may need further adjustment regarding the suitability of the SI. And then we need further discussion of which shall be the driving force, whether PM2.5 or CO2 reduction. So in different fields and in different industries, there are major differences. If we only use our indicator to evaluate, there may be some deviations. Take Jinan, for example. Taking pollution reduction, dust treatment still is the most important area. But this field doesn't realize the reduction of carbon emission, but it contributes a lot to the PM 2.5 reduction. So we suggest that please consider the actual demands, considering the co-benefit between pollution reduction and carbon reduction. And then in the future, we've found out that in different fields and different industry, the governance level is very different. So we need to consider the governance measures and different scenarios, like the thermal power and the steel industries in Jinan. They have already done the reform. It can have very high carbon reduction benefit per unit PM 2.5 reduction, but the cost to further reduce pollution may be too high. So that's all for me. Thank you very much.
好，非常感谢
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhang, for your sharing
协同效益的
about
这个
the
评估方法，讲得非常详细。
evaluation
那
and
我们
assessment
接
of
下来
co-control.
有请
Now the
青岛
floor
市环
is
境工
given
程研
to
究
the
中心
senior engineer
高级工
at
程师
Qingdao
李应
Environmental
菊女士
Engineering
跟
Assessment
大家
Center,
来分
Ms.
享
Li
青岛
Yingju,
市温室气
for
体
sharing on
与
case
大
on
气污染
co-control of
协同
greenhouse
控制
gases and air
成效和路
pollutants
径。
in Qingdao. Let's welcome.
好，请各位。
Distinguished experts, leaders, delegates, good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be part of this discussion. Now I would like to talk about the case on co-control of greenhouse gas and air pollutants in Qingdao. I will cover 3 fronts. Background. First, in 2012, we are among the first batch of low-carbon cities, and we have issued relevant implementation plans and other documents to promote the low-carbon pilot in Qingdao in 2013. The climate action was transferred to the Provincial Bureau of Environment and Ecology, and low-carbon pilot is also now transferred to the Municipal Bureau of Ecology and Environment. And this has further requirements on the coordination fronts, as well as policy guidance. And also, Qingdao has included the synergy between air pollutants and green GHG in the 14th five-year plan, as well as 2035 vision. So the current status in 2013 to 2019, the SO2 and NO2, PM10, PM2.5 intensity are shown here. We can see that in 2020, the 4 pollutants all reached the standards, but we can also see that in 2019, PM10 and PM2.05, including NO2, all had a small rebound. During the 14th and 13th five-year plan for better air qualities, we have enhanced our input in end-of-the-pipe treatment. But in the long term, this has only small potential to tap into. Then how to guarantee quality improvement, air quality improvement in 14th five-year plan? We need to explore new paths. So carbon emission in Qingdao, this shows the 2010 to 2019's carbon intensity of Qingdao, as well as the total emission. We can see that the carbon intensity dropped significantly in 2019. Its carbon intensity dropped by 42.7% compared to 2010, and reaching the target of 37% reduction ahead of the schedule. And we can see that total emission increased a little bit, but in 2016, the speed of the growth slowed down. And in 14th five-year plan, how can we peak and achieve carbon neutrality? We are facing new challenges. and energy status quo, as well as challenges. The left-hand side shows our energy consumption changes. We can see that the energy demand consumption growth has slowed down to 2010 to 2013. It increased by a little bit. Starting from 2013, the consumption grows slower, but the gap of supply and demand is still large. And on the right-hand side, we have the changes in the structural mix. We can see that the share of coal dropped. The fossil fuel grow first and then drop later. And for other parts, it increased. But we can see that their share are still small. Then how to support quality improvement, environment improvement, this is a key challenge for us. We are one of the leaders and first to establish such pilot, led by Qingdao Institute of China's Academy of Sciences and the Energy Foundation. We have established the second phase work for the coal control. So this is our progress. So this shows that our GDP and share of tertiary industry per unit of GDP carbon emission and energy consumption per 10,000 yuan of GDP. From 2013 to 2019, the share of tertiary industry increased. The GDP grew at about 6 to 8%, which is relatively fast. But per unit of GDP, carbon emission and energy consumption per 10,000 yuan of GDP all dropped. And the total discharge of pollutants also dropped. We can see that through transition, the economic development is decoupled with the discharge of pollutants or emission. So we're using less energy and less emission for high-quality economic growth. And this shows the factors impacting carbon emission from 2008 to 2013. And we can see that with the better structure of energy and energy efficiency, carbon emission has been slashed. And secondly, we have a better understanding of carbon emission reduction in treatment of air pollutants. This shows PM 2.5, NOx, as well as different pollutants share in sources. We can see that the mobile sources are a major source, where they are fixed burning or combustion as the second largest source. PM 2.5 mainly from industries and suits. And these two pictures shows the carbon emission in different sectors. We can see from the picture that energy is the major source for GHG emission, accounting for 70 to 94%. And the transmission, cross-provincial border transmission will contribute to about 25% of the emission. And this shows power, heating, industry, transport are major sources of emission. And we can see from these two pictures, the share of industry dropped and transport share increased. And this shows the consumption breakdown. We can see that industry and the operation of buildings are major sources, and we can see that industry share actually dropped while buildings share increased. So through those analyses, we can see that transport, heating, industry are major sources for the two kinds of emissions. They actually contribute to about 82.7% of the total GHG, 96.6% of SO2, and 99.2% of NOx, 54.4% of PM 2.5, and 52.2% of PM10. And we can see that all these sectors actually emitting more air pollutants, emissions as well. And this shows we need to have synergy or similar measures to control such emissions. After we have analyzed the policies regarding this regard, and altogether there are 79 of them. We evaluated all 79 regulations and see that 68 of them can help reduce carbon emission and control air pollutant control. And especially besides soot control, the others are all in line with the carbon reduction. And 80% of the measures are analyzed further. So through their advantages in cost, total reduction, and efficiency, we believe that phasing out coal-fired boiler, total control of coal, phasing out coal-fired plants, and industrial structure updates, etc., can achieve better effects. And also, we have listed the demands during the 14th five-year plan. To meet the carbon emission reduction and air quality requirements of 14th five-year plan, we need to further reduce CO2 by more than 13 million and SO2 by 0.46 million. So we need to enhance emission reduction, and if we can use all the measures I mentioned, we believe we can meet the goals mostly. But for PM 2.5, for PM 10, we still see a gap of 60%. We analyzed further that the 6 measures at the top can contribute to more than 60% of CO2 and 81% of SO2 emission reduction. And to better reduce emission in 14th five-year plan, we proposed 9 measures, including cultivating new drivers, phasing out old drivers, and electrification. So through the through the measures with better effects cannot meet the targets of PM 2.5 and PM 10. So we need additional measures like soot or dust management to compensate for it. And we also rolled out a 3-year action plan for the coordination of picking as well as air quality. So the measures with better effects are included in this action plan. The goal of this action plan is to peak at 2020. To form a synergy between carbon peaking and air quality by 2023 and make breakthroughs with unified goals and standards and improve the industrial energy transport land structures. To achieve these goals, we have major tasks, including systematic and institutional innovation, industrial updates, space optimization, energy mix transformation, as transport mix transformation, etc. So for the sake of time, I won't go into details here. And sixthly, we offered the safeguarding mechanism for synergy, including improved municipal coordination. For the coordination, we have established a committee of ecology and environment, and this committee is coordinating the climate action as well. And also we need to improve assessment and performance assessment system. So the air quality and the carbon reduction targets are both assessed. So within the previous framework, we have incorporated the carbon targets for coordinated assessment, and we improve the policy system as well, including the integration and certification. of carbon. So we have started our work in carbon assessment, integration, and issued reference standards. So industrial parks, as well as the new energy-intensive and carbon-intensive projects need to be assessed in this regard, and we need to strengthen data coordination. We explore the big data application in this, and we need to provide better technological support, including clean energy technology, low-carbon technology, and big data. Sixthly, we need to enhance promotion exchanges so that we can have better awareness among our people. Our plan for next steps, firstly, based on the 14th five-year plan, as well as the relevant action plans, we need to prioritize further to promote the implementation of the 3-year action plan so that all the measures will be implemented. Secondly, we need to strengthen synergy between inventories and integration of platforms, as well as innovation research. So this is my presentation, and your suggestions are welcome.
好，谢谢李老师和我们分享。
Thank you, Li Yingju. Thank you for your sharing regarding the case on co-control of greenhouse cases and air pollutants in Qingdao. Now let's welcome Hu Tao, director from Lakestone Institute for Sustainable Development, about co-control of air pollutants and greenhouse gas in transportation sector.
有请胡博士。
Let's welcome Dr. Hu. I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting me here to talk about the co-control of the carbon reduction and pollution reduction. We've done this work for many years. There are some technical issues here. Any co-control of the slides? So now I need co-control technology here. So this is a project between Adb and Ministry of Transport. This is a research on the co-control in the transport industry. So based on this research, I'd like to talk about the co-control and pollution and carbon reduction. Many years ago, well, since the efficiency of Adb is not that high, so this project started many years ago and it has not yet concluded. This is a co-control of the transportation industry. It involves many experts. It involves many experts, including me, as well as Beijing Jiao Tong University, Beijing Normal University, as well as Ministry of Transport. We have experts from these different agencies. And we've written the report and waiting for the final result. The result of this project This is project output. Well, in the field of co-control, we have been sorting out the theories and the practice. And then we have proposed the methodology of co-control. On the basis of this, we have provided some vision for the transportation industry in China and some recommendations. Very soon, on the website of the ADB and the Ministry of Transportation, you can see this report. So I will not go into detail of this report. And now I'd like to talk about some of my own thinking on pollution and carbon reduction. Well, talking about this topic, well, to be frank, it has become a kind of slogan without thinking. Everyone is talking about this. But from the academic perspective, well, CO2, SO2, NOx, etc., are they the same? Any relationship between blue sky and white clouds and CO2? Actually, it needs multiple target decision making. So between these two different pollutants, we need to strike a balance. We shall always remember our starting point. So why we need the reduction of pollution and the carbon emission? The reason for this is because in reality, we have phenomenon of reducing pollution while not reducing carbon, or vice versa. Like the 9 measures in Qingdao, including the desulfurization and denitration. It seems that with desulfurization, by 1 ton desulfurization, 5.4 carbon is increased. It is because devil is in the details. So although we've done a lot of macro planning, but in the technical part, it is because the chemical reaction is like this. In order to desulfur, you are using some reactions. In the end, it releases CO2. The purpose is to turn SO2 into CO2. And in this process, it consumes energy by combining these two. So by reducing 1 ton sulfur, there are 5.4 tons more carbon generated. And there is a BECCS, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. This is a typical technology. The purpose is to use bioenergy to replace replace coal. Indeed, you've reduced the CO2 because you are not using coal. Rather, you are using the biomass like wood and a tree. But in the process of burning, CO2 reduced, but PM2, NOx, etc. are increasing. So this is in scope 1, and let's look at scope 2. Scope 2 accounting. Just now, speaker from Qingdao talked about the 9 measures. One is to increase the usage of electric taxi, whether it is really environment friendly. So this is a main case study of our project. Our answer is yes and no, or yes or no. Why? Well, in cities, the ambient air quality, maybe EV is improving the air quality. Like I live in Shenzhen, I can feel the air quality in Shenzhen is better than that in Beijing, because in Shenzhen it is 100% EV and electric bus and electric taxi. So when taxis are passing by, you will not smell the fuel, the gasoline, but it doesn't mean EVs. Maybe it improves regional air quality, but where does this electricity come from? Maybe it comes from the coal power plant, emission from the air. Maybe with the circulation of the air, it goes to Japan or South Korea. And then CO2, it is not sure. whether the burning efficiency is higher at power plant or the burning efficiency is higher at the vehicle. It will decide whether EVs are reducing CO2 emission. So whether EV is low carbon or environment friendly, there are a lot of prerequisites. It depends on where does the electricity come from and where are the pollutants emitted. And there is a scope 3, where the PV is really low carbon. Of course, PV is absolute clean energy. It is clean energy without air pollutants in usage. But where do the facilities come from? Like, look at the supply chain of the PV, and while producing the PV module, maybe there are a lot of emissions. Many PV companies have new slogans, that is solar to solar. They are using solar energy to produce a solar panel to guarantee there's no carbon emission in the process of production. But still, there is particulate matter emission. Well, in the production of the silicon, still there is emission of a particulate matter, which is polluting the air. Well, going back to the source, we have to consider why do we need to reduce pollution and carbon emission. What at academic level, there are non-synergy on different levels. One is air pollutants and greenhouse gas. And then another level, air pollutants and CO2. Another level is inside air pollutants, PM 2.5, ozone, VOC. There is also a synergy issue among these. So this is from USEP. There is a multi-P program to treat the synergy issue of this category. Well, in greenhouse gases, there's also synergy issue, like after reducing CO2, then HCFC and other matters may also need to be further handled. So ODAs is handled, and then there is another like Kigali protocol. That is to handle the relationship with the greenhouse gas emission reduction. So there are different levels. So we need to handle academic problems and practical issues. For the blue sky defense war, we shall avoid such phenomenon. It seems that the synergy level is not very high of this device. Well, in practice, we already have very good foundation. In the newly revised atmospheric law, in Article 2, there is a clause about co-control, and there is a planning for co-control in the 13th five-year plan, and in the 14th five-year plan, there is a reduction of pollution and carbon, co-control and synergy. And as for institutions in China, the Climate Change Division is merged from NDRC into Ministry of Ecology and the Environment. So the Climate Change Department and the Air Pollution Department are working side by side. But although they are not working in the same office, so they still need co-control and synergy. But technically speaking, we need more guidelines to move forward. Well, our project of ADB has done a very important contribution. That is, we have developed a methodology. So this is our ADB methodology. You'll find out this from the website of ADB. Well, under the support of Energy Foundation, we did this Urumqi case of co-control. We have officially published this. There are a lot of contents inside this report. I don't have time to elaborate on this case. So I can just briefly talk about this topic. Our research covers many specific contents. So what is co-control? The so-called co-control is to maximize the co-benefit, meaning these measures, policies, planning, etc. Well, in theory, this is IPCC's working group. Well, in theory, we focus on the working group 3 of IPCC, that is, from the source, we need to better control. We were talking about the sources of the pollutants. Well, indeed, they have the same source and rules, but still we need appropriate measures. Although they have the same source, but if you just control from the end, you reduce SO2, but you are reducing NOx, PM, VOC. But in the end, CO2 is from another part. So if we can control from the source, we need to control from the source. This is a continual spectrum of the governance from the source to the process to the end. If we have better control from the source, then we have higher level of synergy. If we just control from the end, then there may be a negative, there is a counter benefit rather than co-benefit. There are a lot of words here. I have very limited time to go through this slide by slide. Well, I want to emphasize one thing. I've listened to the presentations of previous speakers. I have to emphasize one thing, that is, while doing the research, we are emphasizing our principles. The physical and economic synergy are different. Sometimes, if you can reach physical synergy, but the economic synergy is on the basis of physical synergy, and then you are issuing some policies and feasibilities. To realize synergy. So our previous research may be very different from previous speakers. We were first focusing on physical synergy, and then we were thinking about economic synergy. Well, since I have very limited time to talk about specific technologies, while facing the background of carbon neutrality and blue sky defense war, we need to have very good top-level design, not only in Scope 1, but also Scope 1, 2, 3, to control from the source, to realize a dual goal of carbon reduction and pollution reduction. The purpose is to prevent from the negative effect of controlling one rather than have emission of others. And then we will have more technical guidelines to provide guidance, to conduct more pilot works, so as to have more solid foundation for this work. Okay, that's all for me. Sorry, the device is not very synergetic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hu, for your sharing. It's a very good note for us to pay attention to. Good methods is a good foundation. Now the floor is given to Mr. Pan Tao, China Program Director at the Institute for Sustainable Communities, for sharing on contributing to reducing pollution and carbon, a study on the carbon peaking of transport in Hunan. So please open my PPT slides for me. In every meeting, we talk a lot about research, and I believe all of us want to share more about our research. But it's so informative, leaving less time for us to talk or discuss I will try to finish in 15 minutes, and then we can have a little bit more of a discussion. I feel it's a pity that we don't have much time for discussion. So I want to talk about a project for this. In this year, we worked with ISC and Hunan Lianchuang LCC for transport emission peaking plan in Hunan. Just now, Mr. Shi told us during Mr. Shi's presentation, he mentioned the transport trajectory, and I was shocked because according to this trajectory, we won't peak in 3 or 5 years. So background, methodology, results, and next steps. Firstly, context. We have several figures here. Currently, transport accounts for 12% of the total carbon emission in Hunan, according to 2013 inventory. But we can see that for developed economies, for EU it's 24%, for the US it's 29%. That means we have a long way to go. We are not that developed yet in terms of both car ownership and emission. It's not at its peak yet. In the past 10 years, Changsha grew a lot, grew by two-fold. But currently, it's less than 1 car per household. It can grow by 200% to reach 1 car for each household. So every household can have 1 car. Yes, that's okay, but how can we control emission under this prerequisite? According to our verification, with the benchmarking with Europe and the United States, for Hunan, if it grew to 20% in the total share of emission, it will grow by 30 million tons. And then, in this way, Hunan won't be able to peak in 2030. That's for sure. So, in this context, how can we promote Hunan to peak? And what policy mix or measure mix can help us to peak to avoid the 30 million ton growth? So, key issues. The transport sector needs to peak soon. It should not peak in 2030. Then can we peak before 2035? This is for transport. And what is the peak value? And how much can we reduce compared to that 30 million ton of growth? The economic synergy is different from the physical synergy, and we hope our outcome can support the medium to long-term planning of dual carbon roads while serve as a reference for other regions as well. From 2019 to 2035, we have done this research. But we only factored in CO2. In the morning session, the American experts also mentioned the short-lived pollutants. So this is a design for standard carbon peaking, including inventory scenarios as well as action. And in action, it includes cost effectiveness as well as key project carbon economy analysis as well as policy matrix. So in transport and in urban scenarios, we're all following this modularized design for calculation. So this is our roadmap, technical roadmap. Passenger and cargo transport are based on turnover, and this involves provincial transportation as well. And for urban transport, including their commuting inside the city, this is calculated through inventory. And this is our technical roadmap. 3 scenarios, one frozen scenario, that is, we use 2019 as the baseline with the same energy efficiency demand as well as development. We will have the frozen scenario, and the second one is the baseline scenario. It factors in the 14th five-year plan at current measures, and the third scenario is the peaking scenario. It has different policy mixes. This is our outcome, research outcome. Firstly, in 2019, the CO2 emission of transport will be 43.09 million tons. That means per capita transport carbon emission will be 0.65 ton per capita. So actually, it's quite small compared to US and EU. So this shows that carbon emission from transport can be a good story or successful story to be told around the globe. And we can see different sectors, including the blue one for transportation inside the city. And for the vehicles, we now have a total emission of 21.49 million tons. To that 40 million cap, or the total amount. So the transport accounts for almost half of the emission. So half of this emission comes from the cars we drive around. So I believe this should be the key link in our future step. Okay, next slide. And we have done a short analysis as well. We see that, and also we were excited about this. We are #1 in terms of new energy cars ownership because we have base of Beijing automobile, and also we have the intercity rail of Changsha, Zhuzhou, and Xiangtan, as well as CRRC in Zhuzhou. We have many advantages and disadvantages. I won't go into details in here. And in the 14th five-year plan, this will be our baseline. All these factors are fully analyzed and integrated into the model, and this is our result. In baseline scenario or frozen scenario, we cannot peak before 2035. Just like mentioned by Mr. Xu, the trajectory is growing. The frozen one, the blue one is the frozen scenario, and we also have an optimized scenario in the middle, but in this scenario, we also could not peak, and the yellow one shows the peaking scenario. And we can only achieve this with different energy mixes, policy mixes. And we can peak in 2031 according to our model. And the peaking value is about 53.19 million tons of CO2. And in 2019, the baseline is about 43 million. And compared with 2031, the net growth is about 10.1 million tons of CO2. I believe that's a magnificent achievement because we mentioned 30 million tons before, but now actually it could only grow by 10.1 million tons. That would be remarkable. And the emission reduction will be 23%, reaching 15.88 million tons. And we will have a breakdown for those numbers. All these are attainable, but we need to be aware that with the 14th five-year period policies, we could not peak in 2035. And I believe we need to talk with policy makers in those. Because even with all these efforts we make, we could not peak in 2035 using the current policies. So we need to make further measures for this. And this the breakdown between sectors. We can see that the transport within the city grew more and accounted for a larger share, growing from 59% to 67% and grew by about 8 million tons of CO2. And we analyzed the contribution from different reduction policies. We are all very clear about all this, including energy efficiency, optimization of transportation, as well as the clean transition of urban transport. And we have three highlighted in red. These three are the most effective, including new energy cars. Actually, we have a very large database behind all this, but I won't plunge into details here. So in peaking scenario, the new energy vehicles will reduce emission by 6.16 million tons. And for this construction of bus cities will help us to reduce emission by 42.29 million tons. So that means we need to provide comfortable buses, and urban public transport, and also the national standards. We now have the national standards, and it's applicable to heavy or light-duty vehicles. This will help us to reduce emission by more than 3 million tons. All these three measures are the most effective. And then we can achieve the total reduction of 15.88 million tons. Next step, we have done the analysis. According to our classic analysis, we still do not have the economic analysis as well as the synergy analysis, including synergy of economic development as well as the pollutants discharge. And this will be done in our next step. So this is our pathway. I won't repeat it here because it has been mentioned for several times. I want to mention one thing in conclusion. That is, I believe this meeting should send us thinking. This meeting should be inspiring. Mr. Hu also inspired us a lot. What do we still need? What don't we have now? The emission reduction lacks incentives. What can you get from emission reduction other than punishments, or to tear down your boilers, or to ban the pollutive cars from driving around? So this is the core, I believe. Currently, I didn't hear anything about the incentive mechanisms. But with incentives, who will be paying? Carbon reduction done, then I need incentives. Who will pay me? And this means an increase in the cost as well. Then maybe you need to be taxed more, or you need to pay more fees. So with all of these years in modeling, I'm sometimes frustrated because I could not solve this challenge. For example, today if I get up, I see power shortage again or coal-fired plants built. So what did we do in the past 2 years? So I feel so frustrated. I believe we need to think about how can we make up for the gap in mechanism, and that is more tangible. And then for technology, yes, we can do data analysis and models, but that won't help. So I want to call all of you. Yes, we can do the analysis, but I hope all the leaders can hear the call from us to build the incentive mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pan.
时间关系，我们
Well,
还是
because of the
我抓紧一下
time,
时间
we
啊。
still have
是有
a
请
speaker
刘恒，
according
也
to
是
the
对交通
agenda.
研究中
Let's
心
welcome the
高级
Senior
城市
Urban
规划
Planner,
师
Yuheng China
刘洋
Sustainable
先生分
Transportation
享。
Center,
仍然是
Mr.
一
Liu
个
Yang.
技术的啊，
This is
是
also a
城市
very
交通的也
technical
是我们技
topic.
术
This
指
is
南。
Technology
在
Guide
这个关键
version
之后，
2.0
我
for
们
co-control
欢
of
迎大
urban
家提
traffic
问
air
啊，
pollutants
请
and
大家
greenhouse
可以
gas.
先准备
And
一下
after
问
the
题。
presentation, you can ask questions.
好的，是不是接过去了是吧？好，我是给大家汇报一下我们之前做的一点
So I'd
工作，
like to
就是
talk
了解到这
about
个
the
城市
work
交
that
通领
we
域
did
在大气污染的
about
和污染
the
物的这个治理
air
和
pollutants
排
and the
放
greenhouse
监督
gas
下，在这个方面我们
emission
工作做了
from
一个
the
详细的
urban
然后我给大家
transportation.
介绍一下。然后这里就介绍它就是出台的背景，
First, the
然后
background,
手册的一个简单
the
的
brief introduction of the handbook, highlight of it,
在一些城市的
and
一些实
the
践情况。
practice in some cities.
那首先出台背景来
First,
说
the
呢，刚才
background.
我们都提到这些，
Just
就是
now,
碳
we
中
all
和的这
mentioned
些
about
是
carbon
比较生态
neutrality
和建设的
and the
这个
construction
污
of
染
the
现
ecological
在
civilization to fight
还有
against
现在
pollution.
在做这个绿色交通发
And
展
now we are
交通
developing
强
green
国绿色发展
transportation to develop a powerful
我们的
transportation
刚才这个
country.
彭德博士也都提到了
Just now,
像
Dr.
前面
Hu
介绍
Tao
也
and
提
the
到了
previous
在
speakers
节能减排
have
的这个方面，
talked
交通领域
about
呢其实是大方压力是比较大，比较高。
transportation
现在
industry
呢
is
也
under a
是
lot of
在
pressure
文化
to
上
reach the
贡献
peak,
是非常大
and
的。
it contributes a lot to the
所以
pollution
这是
and
关
the
于这个
emission.
交通它与污染物的防治和这个普及的
So,
这个问题，还有这个
transportation is
碳排
important
放
in
有
the
密切的关系。
treatment,
所以
and
这
it
是我们
is
出台的
closely
背景，
related with
和
carbon
跟这
emission.
个污染物
Well,
的排
because
放
greenhouse
都
gas
是燃烧
and
这些
air
成为这个
pollutants
交通工具跟动力的这些
may
能
have
源
the
来
same
产生的。
source.
所以我们想在这个交通领域
So
如果
in
恰当
the
的它的源头
transportation
是
field,
一
if
个
we
和
can
一些
treat
的
the
一些
source,
好
then
机
we
会。
will
然后
have
手册
good
内容呢，
opportunity
前
to
面说
realize
推出这个手
co-benefit.
册呢，它这个导向就是想
Well,
把
the
城市
target
这个
of
大排
this
放的这个考
guideline
虑，
is to
然后呢，从
consider
交通领域
transportation
来
with
开
air
展措施，
pollutants
对
and
于我们
greenhouse
要
gas
起到
emission,
措施的
and then we will
这里
suggest
边
some
我们
measures.
提出了这个5个协
Here
作。
we have
一
5
个是在我们
synergies.
在进行基础研究的时
One
候，在
is
基
in
础信
basic
息上，
research.
从污染物的角度，从碳排
As
放的角
for
度，
the
做一
basic
个考虑，
information,
收
we
集信
will
息啊，
consider
然后进行
collecting
分析，
information
信
and
息足量以
analyzing.
后就进行协作。
We will do
在排
synergy
放清
on
单
this
的
level,
制定上，
and
在
then
3
while
个标签制
compiling
度
the
在清晰
inventory,
的信息上，
setting
在
target
协作
and
控制措施
reduction
工具的这个
scenarios
协作上。
as well as
还有最后就
measures.
是在保障措施
And
上。
then in the
那
guarantee
么前面
measures.
也提到了市场我们交通领域啊，
In
常用的这个节
transportation,
能减排的
we
一些方
often
法
use
包括
some
气象法、周转法、能耗法
methods to calculate,
其他在
including
一些
using
方
energy
面
consumption,
更好用
mileage,
或者一些
turnover,
时候
or
需要
taking
更
over
良好
and
的交
landing
通。
times.
他提到我们这个情景分析的
And
方
then
法，
we
就
also
是因
use
为
scenario
我们
analysis
做这个
method
情景的比较，
because we
然后
will
未来
compare
这
different
个
scenarios
成本分析。
and to analyze the carbon
好，这
peaking.
是我刚才提到，就是基础信息，
This
还
is
有
a
这个
basic
防污染
information,
目标，
emission
还有
inventory,
措施，
target,
还有这个保障措施的
synergy
协作。
measures, and guarantee measures.
这是几个4个方法。
These are the 4
这里面会
methods.
有各方面的措施。
These are
我们
different
总结下来
measures.
呢，有些跟我们的城市
In
建设
summary,
有
some
大
are
关系，
highly
包括
correlated
土地
with
利
the
用啊、
city
交通基础，
construction, like
还有
land
信息分析
usage,
就是在
public
交通基金的源
transportation,
头有
walking and bike system, etc.
车辆油品还有
Well,
然
for
后集团
vehicle
交通
oil
品牌
management, transportation demand management, substitute alternative transportation methods, etc.
也是结合现在
These are the
人工智能
highlights
啊、大数据的
based
这个发
on
展
big data and
从这个
AI.
去感知先知
We
现
are
在的这种信
sensing
息量，
the
把这个
basic
更多的一些基础
information.
信息模型的补
We
全，
have more
然后呢
accurate
同时能够
understanding of
更
the
快的
basic
去监
information
控
of
我们这个
transportation
排放情况。
with
在路径
dynamic
上呢，也
monitoring of
是
the
凭借
pollution.
或者是
On
顺
the
应着
road,
现在国家的这
we
个
are following
新的政
the
策，
new
包括所
policies,
谓出租车呀，或者
including
说新能源化呀，还有以旧换新呀，
taxi,
这
internet
里面还有这个货
hailing
车呀，这个货
taxis,
车是中
and
长
then
时这
trucks,
个
heavy
节能减
trucks
排的，也是一个
is
重
a
要的一个领
very
域。
important
然后
field
呢，这里面
to
推动汽油
reduce
要低油质排
pollution
放量
and
啊，
carbon
这些
emission,
都是我们
like
也
low
是比
sulfur
较符合
content.
国家的这个政策。
This is
包括
also
开放
according
开
to
源
the
交易
national
啊，
policies,
及时
and
让
then
发
to
展大
boost
盘
the
进行
carbon
这个减负
transaction
开展。
using this market
在实施
mechanism
更
to
好战术呢，
reduce
我
emission.
们也要关注多部门和多
We
领
need
域
to
的
pay
协
attention
作，因
to
为
the
它
synergy
要
among
找
different
到经济的
departments
这
and
个成
regions
本， 还
because
有
we
它
need
这
to
个经
consider
济
the
上的
economic
收益情
cost
况。
and
所以在
economic
这个
benefit.
手册里，我们也
So
提出
in
了多
this
有关整体的分析和协同的问题。
guide, we
在第四
also
个要点是
consider
交通流水
synergy
信息技
on
术新模
economy.
式。 现
And
在
the
呢，
new
我们
technologies
也
and
是
new
迎来了
models in the
各领域
transportation
这种在
field.
新城
We are
市化大
facing
企业，包括新
transformation
的
in
汽
many
车生企业进入
industries.
我们交
Many
通实现
technology companies are
实
entering
时
into
的建设数据，
transportation,
它给我们也提供了
city,
一种新
urban
的思考模式，
construction, etc.,
包括
giving
互
us
联
new
网
way
信
of
息
thinking,
啊、
including
智慧交通等等。
smart transportation.
最后一点呢，我就是说说我们在
Last
城
one,
市
I will
还有
talk
现在有
about
一些
some
合作机构
cases
共同探讨
in
的这
some
个合
cities
作的
together
跟这
with
个
some partners.
跟这个实践相结合的这个利用情况。我们这个手册呢，在广州实
So
践
in
呢
our
是
guide, our
对比较
practice
他们在这
in
些用户
Guangzhou,
中
we
呢，
have
其实也是走了我们这样一个大致的路径和流程，
they
包括
have
从这个讲
adopted
车，然
our
后体验
pathway
一些
as well as
具体建议啊，
scenario
刚才他
and
提出了这个
suggestions.
一促三控的这个大的一个配置
Guangzhou
线。
has a background of 1 promotion and
在深
3
圳呢，它
controls
结合它的
strategy.
也提出了三大
Shenzhen
三大
has
战略，就是对
3
空气质量，还有
targets
这个不减
about
排，
air
还有这个就
quality,
是更重要的产业
pollution
经济，
reduction,
然后
and
是一种绿色经
economic
济的
development.
高质
They
量发
shall
展。
have a high
然后
quality
呢，
green
在
economic
深圳方面
development.
呢，有一个很有意义的小变
In
化，在
Shenzhen,
这
they
个
have very
这个广州都市
good
方面呢，非常前
legislation
沿，
guarantee.
它有很多创新的这种
They
机
have a
制。
lot of innovative
在昆明
mechanisms.
呢，我们也是加入了
And
很
we
多这个
in
对于经
Kunming, we
济
have added a
经济
lot of
性的研究，
analysis
包括各
about
领域， 然
economy,
后看它合作
including
的这个
different
风险，
fields.
对对
And
方来说是
in
更
carbon
加的这个
peaking,
实质的、实
the
惠的这种
local
方式。
governments will
在风
have
能体系
more
上是
benefits
更
to
加的
reap
去
in
然后呢，
economy.
把这个不同的
And
措施，
the
它们在
different
这个经济性
measures
上能达到一个什么样的强度，在
effects
一
in
些对
economy
同
will,
时
are
没有带
analyzed
来
as
这个
well,
GDP 的这个压力。
because we also have
在
GDP
经济
growth
上不
pressure,
断地去
so
推
we
进
need
再
to
改
boost
善
GDP
能源耗
growth
增加。
while
在今
avoiding
天呢，
large
我们也是做
emission
了很多具
growth.
体的，包括
And
税负
we
的
have done a
尤
lot
其
of
是对这个
policy
这个
analysis
它对我们
for
地
different
排
policies.
放的这个排放的这个技术进行了一些这种弹性分
We
析啊等等。
have done
然
some
后
elastic
到
analysis
到
about
这个
the
结果
discharge
出现预见。
of pollutants
最简单说，
under
我们
the
在
impact
城
of
市可以
policies.
看到，
So we can
包括
see
汽车
that
的
in
机构都
different
也在尝试
cities,
用这种路
they
径
are
去做，
also
包括昆明呢，
implementing the
这个
same
在几
roadmap.
个方面都采用了这种
They
协
all
同的
used the
从政策到
coordinated
指导，包括做
consideration
政策渐进的。
and to provide
那下一
policy
步呢，我
guidance
们
as
也
well
想
in
为
our
了
next
更
stop
好地推广我们
to
的绿色
better
的水平，包
promote
括
our
在技术层面
manual.
看看是不是在我们未来在五大
I
环
believe
中
in future in carbon
做出
neutrality
的
and
这种是否
carbon
能应用在
peak,
我们这个经
we
济。
might be
同时
able
呢，
to
在协
use
同化的
our
这个上面
outcomes.
也是要占领制高点，
And also we
竞
need to
争力
gain an upper hand
地方的这种关心的目标切合一
and
下。然后呢，还有就是在指标的建构
provide
上
advice in line with the considerations of the local government, and we can use binding,
我们
expected,
在协同上面
or
我们
guiding
提到我们这
indicators.
个能耗
And we focus on energy consumption, including in the energy structure adjustment as well as promotion of new energy for the dual control. So this is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Liu Yang, for the detailed introduction of the guide. And now we'll have a Q&A session. This afternoon, we have 5 presentations. You can ask questions to them. Well, we only have one opportunity to ask one question since this is a very long day. Any question from the floor, from the audience? My question is to Mr. Hu Tao. Well, as for the carbon target in Changsha, we are realizing this target, while trying to realize the target. Well, for the daily sustainable life or low carbon life, how can public work towards this target, apart from government and enterprises? What can public do? Okay, thank you for your question. Although I'm not very good in this field, my work is to B and to G, not to C. But still, I will try my best to answer your question. First, the public IPE's work, they have a plan which involves a lot of to C policies, like the public, like you can take photos of behaviors harming the environment and upload the photos to the website. This is to improve the awareness of environment protection of the public and really allow each citizen to participate in this. This is IPE. And then, recently speaking, I communicated with Alibaba. They have Ali Cloud, and there are a lot of smaller cloud. One is called Energy Consumption Cloud. This is 2G and 2B, and in the future they will work toward 2C. So based on Alibaba's big data, like the products you bought, they will calculate whether this product is low carbon or environment friendly, and whether your transportation is green transport, whether you ride their bike or e-bike from other companies. So they use big data to incorporate the environment-friendly behaviors of the public into their energy consumption cloud under Alibaba. And as for me, at the Global Resource Research Institute, and I worked at the Ministry of Environment Protection. They have a communication and promotion center, like to advocate for green transport. Director Jia Feng has been promoting bike transport throughout the whole country. It is like going back 20 years ago. No matter WWF or the promotion center, they've done a lot of communication work. So I really recommend you to find more information from their websites. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hu, for your sharing. Thank you. Any other question? Well, if no, let's invite Madame Lin Weiwei, Program Officer of Low Carbon Cities Energy Foundation China, to summarize. Thank you, Geng Yu. It is not a summary, actually, since it is very late. Our experts online and the leaders and colleagues offline. It's been a really long day. I believe that we've all learned a lot. Well, like Dr. Pan Tao emphasized, that we hope that this meeting can be very inspiring, allowing us to think about this topic. What is the next step? Well, personally speaking, I'd like to say something very briefly. Well, carbon peaking, especially for the cities, It is a target, but it is not the final goal because carbon needs to go back to the development of cities. So cities need to utilize this opportunity to cultivate new industries with green and new technologies like recycling, reuse of resources, so that we can really have better development of cities and then also consider the treatment of carbon rather than simply black out or limit the usage of power. This shall be a long-term thing, like emerging industries or new momentum. It cannot be done overnight. For all cities, there is painful period. So how can we go through this period for new development, for sustainable development? So this is my personal feeling. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the experts online, offline. I'd like to thank all the colleagues and leaders. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in Changsha in person. Sorry I cannot come to Changsha in person this time. I'd like to thank the organizer and I'd like to thank all the staff. Thank you very much. Thank you.
好，谢谢薇薇。
Thank you,
本
Wei
来
Wei.
我是准备了感谢
Well, actually,
薇薇
I
已
have
经说
planned
讲
to
了。
thank
好，
the
谢谢大家
speakers
今天
since
参
Wei
加
Wei has already expressed her
感谢各位
gratitude.
嘉宾的
Thank you
精彩
all
分享，
for your
让我
sharing,
们从国家、省市、
allowing us to
官民
understand
等多个层面和角度， 对
the
这个
development on different levels to reduce pollution and to reduce carbon emission for co-benefit. Now we have better understanding of the national strategy, etc.
所以特别的感谢，还坚持到现在
Thank
的
you
各位
very
在场
much
的
for
还有在线
staying
的朋友，
until
感谢
now.
你们的慷慨支持，
Thank you for
也
your
感谢我们
support
的同团，
from online
让
and
我们看
offline.
到
I'd
更
like to
多和
thank
实
our
现更
interpreters.
加美好未来的这样的努力，
so that we
也
can
感
see
谢
our
我们
hard
的
work
新
to
闻媒体
build
朋友
a
们的支
bright
持。
future together. I'd
我
like to
特别
thank our
感
media
谢在
friends.
这个
I
疫
would
情
also
这样
like
很不容
to
易的情况下，会务组
thank
对
the
本次活
organizing
动所付
committee
出的
for your
这
hard
个
work
辛勤劳动，
facing
欢迎
the
大家继
pandemic.
续参加明天的活动，
Welcome
也祝
back
大家有
tomorrow.
个愉快的一
Wish you a
天。
wonderful
那
day.
今天下午的论坛
So
就到
that's
此结
all
束，
for
也
this
期待我们
session.
有更多
We
线
are
下
looking
的聚
forward
会，
to
谢谢。
more offline gatherings. Thank you very much. Thank you.